Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Decadent Society, How We Became the Victims of Our Own Success by Russ Douthat, a New York Times columnist. And this is from, it's about the middle of his first chapter. This is a subchapter titled The Limits of Neoliberalism. There's no shortage of theories to explain this great stagnation, to borrow a phrase from one of the theorizers, the George Mason University economist Tyler Cowen. And there's also no need to simply choose between them. Like most broad trends, the economic decadence of the developed world is overdetermined, and almost every serious attempt at explanation will contain some element of truth. The most politically appealing theories, the ones animating our populist and socialist insurgencies, tend to blame neoliberalism itself, claiming that the medicine for 1970s stagflation has proven to be poisonous in large doses. The push for ever freer trade has hollowed out Western economies, the argument goes, offshoring productive industries and killing decent jobs, making financiers and knowledge workers rich while the middle class shrinks steadily. Meanwhile, low tax rates intended to spur investment have enabled the rich to keep more of their gains while starving the programs required to protect the poor and boost the working classes. Antitrust policy has become so fixated on the so-called benefits of consolidation, lower prices for consumers, that it has ignored all the ways that market-dominant corporations can warp policies and strangle innovation. And anti-inflationary policies, forged to counteract a crisis that's now generations behind us, have been adopted as a dogma that's now by the West's financial and political elite, which demands fiscal austerity under every circumstance and deprives struggling economies of the cash they need to grow. You don't have to accept every aspect of this argument, and indeed the populists of the left and right disagree about which aspects to stress, to see that it describes a real phenomenon, perhaps not the outright failure of neoliberalism, but diminishing returns from some of its preferred policies, and an overconfidence among the Western leadership class that solutions from the 1970s are permanently applicable. On trade, for instance, the general principle that open markets have more winners than losers led policymakers to assume that this would necessarily happen and to overestimate how quickly communities affected by outsourcing would recover and how swiftly other sectors of the economy could compensate. In particular, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology economist David Autor has argued persuasively that the China shock, the dramatic offshoring that followed Beijing's entrance into the World Trade Organization in 2001, inflicted more economic damage on working-class communities in the United States than many experts anticipated, without generating the compensating growth and job creation expected elsewhere. This is not a knockdown case against free trade, just a case against overconfidence in its incautious application. And the same argument applies to other features of the neoliberal program. It's quite possible that lower tax rates spur growth and innovation when tax rates are cut from 70% highs, but also that a program of permanent upper bracket tax cutting, as practiced by America's Republican Party, won't produce the hoped-for spillover effects among the bottom 95%. It's possible that the initial economic insight that some corporate consolidation could be good for consumers was useful for antitrust decision-making in the 1970s and 80s, but needs to be corrected as monopolies regather. It's possible that a program of deficit reduction and tight money that makes sense when inflation is galloping doesn't make sense when we're closer to deflation. The countries sometimes need a loose monetary policy to fight stagnation, and having a financial overclass too fixated on the perils of a for-now imaginary inflation is a recipe for permanently lower growth. Then, alongside this brief against an overextended neoliberalism, there's a more subtle argument, pushed by the more serious sort. I think I skipped a page here. Sort of liberalism that the neoliberal program hasn't so much pushed too far as pushed in the wrong direction. In this argument, we don't need less deregulation, but a different kind than we have, because incumbents and insiders in the West have captured the sprawling regulatory state and used it to freeze out potential competition. The age of stagnation, according to this theory, is the fruit of what Brink Lindsay of the Niskenson Institute and Stephen Tellez of Johns Hopkins University describe as a captured economy, in which everything from land use rules to exclusionary zoning to occupational licensing to ever-expanding intellectual property protections to corporate subsidies and tax breaks all converge to create a system that's basically the worst of socialism and the worst of capitalism conjoined, plutocratic and sclerotic, overregulated and undertaxed, with an upper class enriching itself off rents rather than innovation,
control over
and a
the
service
quality
class that can't advance beyond its station. The overlap between this more libertarian argument and the left-wing critique of neoliberalism is apparent in one of the texts of the post-financial crisis left, French economist Thomas Piketty's 2013 tome, Capital in the 21st Century, which mined centuries worth of statistics to argue that capitalism inherently makes the rich richer.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Wednesday. Thom Hartmann here with you live from home, where we're sheltering in place, Louise and I. And in our second and third hour, we're going to get into a whole lot of stuff like strategies for doing this and surviving, in an era of pandemic. I mean, the Americans haven't confronted this since 1918, really, in any kind of meaningful way. And here we are again. But it's the first hour of our program on Wednesday. And so our first hour is going to be Congressman Mark Pocan. It's Middays with Mark. Congressman Pocan represents the 2nd District of the state of Wisconsin. He is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives, actually in all of Congress, the House and the Senate. His website is pocan.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. Congressman, and our telephone number, if you want to call and talk to Congressman Pocan, if you have questions for him or whatever, 202-808-9925. The line's just opened. Congressman, welcome back.
Well, thanks, Tom. Glad to be here during these trying times for everyone.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. And by the way, because I'm doing the show from home, just like when I'm on the road, you and I have done this before using the same equipment, there's about a 1-second delay between us. So, from time to time, if we're speaking to each other, which we won't be doing much, because as soon as we get some calls on the board, we may step on each other, and it's just all fine. I'm curious your thoughts on what's going on in Congress right now, how the administration and how Congress are dealing with this crisis. I think we can legitimately call it that. And anything else that's on your mind? We haven't had an opportunity to speak before you went on the air because I'm at home.
Sure. I think, honestly, we are dealing coronavirus most of the day, every day, right now, and in difficult situations. A lot of our staff are all working from home, like you're doing. Obviously, people are encouraged where they can to try to do that, but obviously that can't happen everywhere. So people need to be smart about all sorts of precautions that we should be doing. But right now in Congress, the Senate is looking at the third package, which is going to be a big package. And right now, Progressive Caucus, for example, is a call today with our members. We've got some recommendations we're putting forward to our leadership, and we have been putting forward to our leadership, covering a bunch of different areas, but trying to make sure that we're addressing every bit that we can that needs to be covered. We like the idea of the direct checks going out. We think that's going to be helpful, although I think the amount might be somewhat in question. We understand the concern for small businesses that they may not be around in 6 weeks if they don't have some assistance as well. We need to make sure that people, no matter who you are, can get access to a test. We need to make sure that more people are protected. Families first really is the mantra that we have going into this. And there's just a lot happening and new information every single day. And we're asking everyone to stockpile on compassion and patience rather than toilet paper. I think that's the best advice in some ways because, the uncertainty can be as problematic as the virus in some ways, and we can't let that happen.
Yeah, well said. Okay, you want to pick up phone calls?
Absolutely.
Okay, Steve in Phoenix, Arizona. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Greetings, Tom and Congressman Pocan. I'm Steve from the native of Madison and longtime Phoenix resident here now. We spoke before. I appreciate it. My wife, she is going to be having her office closing the end of April. She's been in Tom's line of work for about 30 years plus in advertising and such, newspapers and all. This is closing end of April. It's moving to Houston. They're moving their office. So what can we do for doing extended unemployment benefits, Congressman? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, one of the many issues I think that's on the table right now that we're talking about. Also, I am very intrigued. Depending where this goes, Tom, I don't know you. I know you would know because you know everything. But when it comes to things we did during the Great Depression around work hours, the Kellogg Company, for example, I know there's a book written on how they reduced hours across the board for everyone rather than laying off some people, and how that really helped keep the economy going. We're looking at ideas like like that. We're looking at how maybe you could augment some unemployment comp with that. We're looking at these direct checks going out. We're trying to make sure that people can be protected. Sick pay is important, but this is going to be going beyond sick pay, I think, very, very quickly. And therefore, we have to be ready for every possible scenario. So we hope that as the Senate is taking a lead on this package, although obviously our leadership is very, very involved and our committee chairs on this, we as members are trying to help get a bunch of things covered, including that extended unemployment. And like I said, we're going to have a document coming from the Progressive Caucus probably by the end of today. I think we have a call at 5 p.m. Central, but I could be wrong on that, with members to go over, I think, the final recommendations.
Yeah. On the Depression, of course, FDR said the best welfare program is a job, and then he created the WCPA and the CCC and all these other programs. That's not quite going to work right now because people can't go to work. But if we look at what other countries are doing, virtually every Western European country mandates at least 50 weeks of paid sick time cumulatively, or long-term unemployment, one or the other. And we had several years of long-term unemployment before the Bush administration took a hatchet to it. And so those seem like just fairly simple fixes right away to get money into people's hands.
I think one of the concerns... I'm sorry.
The problem with both of those is
that
they don't address the concerns of people in the gig economy, people who are, quote, contractors, people who are Uber drivers, or people who are part-time workers who a lot of companies keep people under 30 hours so they don't get benefits. And, it's like this is a huge problem. I wrote an op-ed this morning saying that this is a Great Depression, World War II style problem, and it may even be worse than the Great Depression. And we need to prepare for the worst and work for the best. But preparing for the worst means not a $1 trillion stimulus, but maybe over the next 18 months, a $15 to $20 trillion stimulus, because that's what it took to get us out of the Great Depression. Back to you.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that still didn't get included in one of the things that we're hearing about, especially at restaurants, for the most part now in places like Wisconsin, I know in California, other places, you can only do carry-out, and I think that's going to soon probably be nationwide. Restaurants, as you know, run on high volume, low margins. I think they did a survey here, and I'm going to probably say the numbers wrong, but it was somewhere in the reserves that most restaurants have is about 11 days worth. They still have expenses. Every business still has expenses, even if employees are on sick pay. And I think that's one of the concerns. Just saying we can make loans available. I know as a small business owner, I've got certain fixed costs no matter what that are going to happen, and that's going to run out very quick if we don't address those. Jobs won't be available in 2 months unless we also address that aspect. So as much as the gig economy, it's the small business owners, the restaurateurs, and so many others. It's the mom and pop shops who, often those people running the shop that are working it may not be eligible, and some of the benefits we have to make sure they are. We are going to have to get creative, I think, on a few fronts.
Yeah. Here in Oregon, Kate Brown, our governor, just suspended all evictions for 6 months. Other communities around the country are suspending police participating in evictions. I don't know why they ever did in the first place. And I believe France and Spain have both suspended all the need for all debt payments for 3 to 6 months now so far, and the government will backstop the banks in that regard. But I don't know the details of that. I'm trying to find it out. So anyway,
I just got information too. Yeah, I just got information the president is invoking the Defense Production Act. I had signed a letter Andy Levin had led to try to get increased production on some of the various supplies we need with testing and other things. And so that's something, I think that's a good sign, too, that's coming out today.
Is that the law that Franklin Roosevelt got passed to convert the auto factories into making bombers?
This is to allow, the Department of Defense to be able to do some of the production right now that we need, because it's not just reagents, it's all sorts of stuff around testing that we're running into potential short supply on. So I think this will help fill that gap.
Yeah, I heard New York State was running out of swabs, just the thing they stick up your nose.
Across the country, it's not just New York State. That's the issue.
Yeah, wow. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us taking your calls right after the break here. Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program, our national town hall meeting during this time of crisis.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And let's not forget that crises are great opportunities, too. Moments of crisis are moments of opportunity for us to reevaluate all of our systems right across the board. We'll be back. And welcome back. Let's get to some phone callers here. Liz in Los Angeles. Liz, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning to both of you. I have a question about how to make the rich contribute to this, and I have a suggestion. A company like Amazon, I see their trucks all over L.A. They're not paying any taxes to use the roads. Why don't we charge them like $1 million for each truck they have on the road? And I'm sure there are other solutions for other companies that can do something like that.
Yeah, Liz, I think right now what we're focused on is getting financial support out to folks who need financial support, and then how we raise the revenue, I think, will be a part of this, but I don't think that's the next 48 or 72 hours conversation. We're dealing with getting right now the support that we need to, and while there could be many ideas, as you're right, many of these big companies that are being exempted from some of the sick leave and other things, we want them, first of all, to be included. They pay very little taxes. All the small businesses pay taxes, and there probably isn't anything right now being looked at other than loans to help there, and that, I think, is still a bit problematic. So there's a lot we're trying to figure on right now. The immediate crisis will be around dealing with getting financial support to individuals and others that we need to do. How we fund that, I think, will be some of the next steps. Also, Tom, it's just said, the president said we'll suspend all foreclosures and evictions until April, or through April. So at least there's a short-term statement that seems to be moving forward.
That is great, step by step. Susie in Redondo Beach, another KPFK listener. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. We have a minute and a half to the break.
Hi. I wanted to suggest I like families first, but an even probably more apt one would be the vulnerable first, because there's certainly a lot of wealthy families that will be fine in this crisis. But the vulnerable, whether they're the homeless, and I don't hear the homeless population talked about at all in most of these discussions about this crisis. And which also brings me to, are the Democrats going to push through Medicare for all? That's not linked to an election. It was always supposed to be for everyone.
Sure. Susie, let's let the Congressman answer. We're down to 40 seconds here.
Sure. I doubt. I think the question really is around Medicare for all, and I think I doubt that's going to happen with this president right now as they're addressing this crisis. But hopefully, we're realizing things like making sure everyone can get tested is in the best interest of the public. So the more we do these types of things, we are making the absolute strongest case for Medicare for all you could possibly make, and hopefully that will help us to be able to do that much sooner than it otherwise might have taken.
And how do we support the homeless?
There are measures as well that are being looked at with all this. We don't have all the final details at all of this next package, but this is the big package. This is at least $1 trillion. It won't be the last package, in my opinion. I'm quite sure there's going to be more. But, right now it's been taking a little while to figure out all the assessment holes, and that's what's happening. The good news is, even from what we've seen just from the president's press conference this morning, things that we all recommended weeks ago are being now considered.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah, I thought we were. Oh, there we go. I've been looking at the clock and I was off by 15 seconds. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us, taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls for the Congressman in just a moment. He is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. His website, pocan.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan, P-O-C-A-N. We'll be right back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Carl in Fairland, Texas. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you, Congressman. Would it be possible that the President of the United States could commandeer all these cruise ships and move them into port harbors where they could be effectively turned into hospital ships in weeks with good composite crews of electricians, carpenters, and HVAC people? Thank you.
Yeah, Carl, I'm guessing just from everything I've heard about the ventilation systems in those cruise ships that it would be very hard to make them retrofit to something like hospitals. I think you'd almost be better doing something almost ground up or in some of the military-style hospital facilities that we can put up temporarily. I'm not sure if cruise ships, because of the very problem that we can already see have been created because of the ventilation, I don't know how you would change that substantively enough, quickly enough to make them hospital beds, but just a guess.
Glenn in Falls City, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, good morning, gentlemen. As dire as this is and sad as it is, I'm just looking for a message of hope from Congress, something like putting us all together in a great war style. We all got to put it together, whether we're doing victory gardens or on the front lines. This could be a Cold War or it could be a Holocaust, depending on how we all work on it together.
Yeah, Glenn, great point. I did a Facebook Live last night, and this is one of the things that I wanted to leave people with is, I've been very heartened, after being in Congress for 7 and now almost, I guess, a quarter years. I have watched Republicans and Democrats ask the same questions around supply chains and testing and all the rest. We really are working together. Yesterday, I was on the phone and texting with a Republican colleague of mine in the state. We're all working on joint efforts together. I think, if anything, this really has brought people very, very much together, with maybe a couple blips from Kevin McCarthy early on. Right now, it seems to be happening. Occasionally, we're getting someone saying things that aren't so wise, but I think it's better to focus on what we're moving forward with rather than some of the mistakes people are saying, because it doesn't help to do that. And the good news is people are really rowing together on this. And we will come out of this. I mean, we have the capacity to, and right now people are working together. And like I said, this is a great time to stock up on compassion and patience rather than toilet paper. We need to really, drop a lot of maybe the walls that have occurred previously, whether they're politically or ideologically, and move forward. And I do think that's happening, and I think that's what's going to help us get through this.
Christy in Minneapolis, listening on KTNF. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Pocan. Thank you for taking my call.
Hi, Christy.
I'm a nurse. Hi. I'm a nurse at a local hospital, the VA hospital, actually. And a couple weeks ago, all the N95 masks were wiped out of our supply closets. And we don't know who took them, but I approached my supervisor yesterday and asked, when are we going to get some? He did not know. And then he said, we need to be properly fitted in order to wear one anyways. And so that is really concerning to me, because if we don't have protective devices when we're working with our veterans, how are we protecting them and each other? And when are we going to get these supplies?
Yeah, in fact, I was trying to find a text I had from Mark Takano, who's been very much on top of this as chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee. He's been looking at the VA. VA is experiencing what everyone else is experiencing, and we don't want to have that. That's why I think the defense production that we've requested and now the president seems to be moving forward with is going to be vital to get more of these items out to the medical facilities we have to have them going out to. We've heard about supply shortages in various areas. The good news is people are keeping on top of it. For a while last week, the reason we were banging the drum so loud on lab capacity was that was the important issue. We had last Monday only enough capacity to do about 16,000 tests nationwide in a day. Now that's more than doubled, and it's now in an area we're not as worried about. Now we're worried about things like reagents and other supplies. So that's why defense production will help take care of that. We're all moving to the right place, but there's no question. Had some of this happened a little sooner, we'd be a little better off. But right now, we're pulling in the same direction to make sure we're getting these goods out as quickly as possible and getting the people tested that need to be. And, another thing I think it's important, you're going to continue to see rises in numbers even after we've turned the corner, because we're first now finally testing people and we know more people have the coronavirus. So don't be spooked. I think there could be at least a 7-day, if not longer, lag from when we actually see something good happen from when it's actually happened. So I think people just really having that compassion and patience right now is going to be important for all of us. And thank you so much for working. Right now it's a tough job in any medical facility, and I just want to say thank you and to everyone who works in those areas.
Nancy in Irvine, California. We have just a minute to the break, Nancy. Quick question for the congressman, please.
Yes, Trump mentioned toward the end of his press conference yesterday that he was going to be bailing out Boeing, and I wondered how much of the package this meant for the people is actually going to Boeing. No one seems to have picked up on this.
Yeah, there's nothing on paper yet, so I don't have an answer for you on that.
So is that the administration has a bailout package that's different from the one that you guys put together in the House?
No, it's going to be the next package, and they've recommended something for airlines. We're saying all sorts of things, like if you're going to do some, assistance for some big business, who often don't pay taxes and small business do, let's make sure it's helping across the board. Let's make sure it's not used for stock buybacks. I mean, we're trying to put some criteria. I don't know where we'll get in those negotiations, but we know that this is part of, I think, what the next package is on the table is really focused on that economic side of this, but we don't have the details right now because there's nothing on paper.
Yeah, and we got about 10 seconds here. Hopefully they'll be getting it to you soon. Do you have any indication of how this is moving?
It's going to start in the Senate. So the last two bills started in the House. We have a conference call tomorrow with all Democrats again, so I assume we might have something by then.
Okay, great. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. He's the co-chair of the House, of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And we'll be back taking your calls on Middays with Mark in just a moment.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back. Our book today is How to Get Rid of a President by David Preece. And this is from the chapter Rejected by the Party, starting on page 12, kind of mid-chapter. Presidents need not be thrown out at the polls on election day to find themselves dislodged from the White House. History shows us that a chief executive's own political allies can remove that incumbent when they perceive him as unpopular or unfit. Refusing to nominate a president for a second term, or better yet, getting the incumbent to realize that he should walk away before it becomes an embarrassing vote at the convention, does bring the party significant pain. But many politicians have calculated that discarding their own party's toxic president by internal action is better than waiting for the voters to do it. This dynamic remained absent for the first half century or so of American politics. George Washington, who didn't represent any formal party, set a precedent by stepping away from re-election after 2 terms. Successor after successor followed suit, keeping the support of their parties until they left office after 8 years. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and Jackson lost the next election, both Adamses and Van Buren, or met the Grim Reaper, Harrison. John Tyler, if only in this one respect, was a trendsetter. He began a 6-president cascade of men who failed to appear on their party's ballot in the general election after their first term. One, Zachary Taylor, literally had no choice. Like Harrison, he died in office. The others, by staying alive through their 4-year terms, could have carried their party's banners again on Election Day. Not one did, as national agonizing over slavery and other tensions within each of the major parties made it difficult for any president to build and sustain a governing coalition. Of those 5 chief executives, only James Polk left with a solid reputation and a ledger of successes. He'd told Democrats upon his nomination in 1844, "I shall enter upon the discharge of the high and solemn duties of the office with the settled purpose of not being a candidate for re-election." And he stayed true to his word. It was just as well, only 3 months after what would have been his second inauguration, he died at the age of 53. The 3 presidents who followed Polk, the forgettable series of Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, and James Buchanan, shared 3 characteristics. First, historians routinely rank them among the nation's worst presidents. Second, and related to that, they took no responsibility for resolving the national moral failure of slavery. And third, no matter how they had attained office, they, like future presidents Chester Arthur and Lyndon Johnson, found themselves spurned by their own parties. The Whigs had learned in 1840 that a celebrity candidate seemed to have an easier route into the White House than a party regular. So in 1848, they nominated General Zachary Taylor, a recent hero of battlefields in the Mexican-American War. Despite his lack of solid political principles or any apparent passion for the job, just 2 years earlier, he'd said with apparent sincerity, "I am not and never shall be an aspirant for that honor." Taylor won the election over Democratic candidate Lewis Cass. In July 1850, he became the second straight Whig general to president who couldn't make it to the next election alive. Vice President Millard Fillmore took his place. Fillmore had risen to prominence in New York's anti-Mason party dedicated to exposing and opposing Freemason fraternal organizations, but switched allegiance to the Whigs in the 1830s. In the first year and a half of the administration, inter-party rivals had manipulated Taylor better than Fillmore did, leaving him little to do but preside over the Senate and stew over his fate in a useless job. But as president, he was prepared to avenge perceived slights. Ahead of their expected dismissal, all the cabinet members whom Fillard had inherited from Taylor offered their resignations, which were quickly accepted by the new president. He asked them to remain in place for 1 month. They agreed to stay for 1 week. Fillmore would proceed to fire more previous political appointees than any of his successors had. More than half of those at the State Department, for example, had to find new jobs. The biggest development during Fillmore's presidency was the Compromise of 1850. This set of bills admitted California to the Union as a free state, allowed the organization of the Utah and New Mexico territories without reference to slavery, resolved both the Texas state boundary and the Lone Star State's remaining debt, abolished the slave trade in the District of Columbia, and reaffirmed the fugitive slave law that required the returning of slaves escaped across state lines. Fillmore signed each bill, believing this package of measures had fixed what he considered an annoying issue that kept getting in the way of his other priorities. The compromise bills delayed a war between the states, but at a cost. They not only perpetuated slavery, but split the Whigs further apart, as most Northerners refused to abide by the fugitive slave law. Congressional elections in November 1850 increased the Democratic opposition's majorities in both the House and the Senate. The rest of the president's term was so bad that the highlight might have been the start of Commodore Matthew Perry's voyage to Japan to open that country to American trade, even though he didn't arrive until Fillmore left office. Not long after rising to become the chief executive, Fillmore declared he wouldn't run again in the 1852 election. He reiterated that in 1851. But the trappings of presidential power and the pleas of his remaining party faithful convinced him to retract that pledge and make a late entry into the field of candidates. He portrayed his about face as a noble personal sacrifice for the good of the party and the country. And during the spring of that election year, 8 Whig state conventions endorsed him. As delegates gathered for what a leading historian of the era calls the longest, most rancorous, and most debilitating Whig National Convention ever to meet, the first tally had Fillmore in the lead. How to get rid of a president. Coming up on the Science Revolution, what's the truth on coronavirus testing? And why has Trump refused to accept the World Health Organization test that the entire rest of the planet is using? Melinda St. Louis is here on how the insurer's conduct is outrageous on the coronavirus pandemic. Robert Weissman joins in on how Public Citizen and 70 organizations are calling on Trump to prevent Big Pharma from profiteering on coronavirus. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear is also here about the ongoing Fukushima disaster. And in Geeky Science, find out what happens if you walk just 30 minutes a day. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever you find great podcasts. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. And Joy in Crescent City, California. Oh, there we go. Hey, Joy, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my call, and thank you for letting me ask my question to Congressman Pocan. I'm disabled, and I live on Social Security disability income, and my rent and utilities takes up about 75% of my income, and so I take side jobs to supplement that income. And I lost one of my side jobs. I had a side job in the Bay Area for 2 weeks, and the money that I was going to make from that side job was going to pay for my car insurance and my car registration, which is due at the end of this month. And now, because the Bay Area has shut down, I am not going to have that money to pay for my insurance or my car or my registration. And I'm wondering, is there any assistance for somebody like me? Because I'm in a pickle here.
Yeah, I think that's something, again, that we're recommending. I think any package that sends money out will include someone like yourself. The biggest thing is the devil's in the details as the Senate works this out right now. But clearly, we're talking about everyone getting this check so that you have ability to pay your bills still as we're moving forward. I think the good news is, from what I saw on the Washington Post this morning, the President right now, his proposal is two $1,000 checks and a loan package to small business. We'll see where that winds up with where we're working for things. Many of us would rather see something more like $2,000 a month going to people, but we do want it to go to people like yourself, and my hope is that through this package that will happen.
Shayna in Prairie Grove, Arkansas. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good Wellness Wednesday to everyone. And Congressman, I was wondering about, is there anything in the works for the 2020 election, especially presidential, that we can all vote by mail?
Yeah, Shayna, so there is, Senator Wyden started it, and in the House, I think we've got a few people who are leading it, but a proposal to do just that, to make sure that we can do mail ballots. It works well in Oregon. Tom, you know that. You live there, and we think that would be a good method to do nationally. The last thing I think we'd want to do is postpone any November election. I don't think we'll ever need to, but we want to be prepared for it, and the best way to be prepared for it is to be prepared via mail ballot. So something that Progressive Caucus is going to be, I believe, advocating after we have our call today with members, but many of us already have signed on to that as an idea. We think it's a very smart way to move forward.
Yeah, I think the lead author who collaborated with Ron Wyden was Portland, Oregon's Congressman Earl Blumenauer, who's a member of your caucus. He's a member of the Progressive Caucus, if I recall.
And I know Jamie Raskin and a few others are on the bill,
Raskin.
too. So.
Yeah. Caroline in Los Angeles, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, I just wanted to ask about the whole logistics of the check sending situation. I'm one of the people with the last two digits of my Social Security number being high. It starts with a 9, and the way that they've done this in the past when they've done these kind of checks is the people with 00, 01, 02, they get them first, and then all the way at the end, the people with 90, 91, those with the last two digits high. I've never seen a stimulus check in my life. I've never gotten one because by the time it takes so long to get those checks going and to get them out, it takes weeks or months. The news cycle has changed. The political agenda has changed. And every time I've checked, they're like, oh, we ended that program long before I ever saw anything. So literally never gotten a check. And other people I know have never gotten a check. And to me, if you're looking at the situation of, people being unstable right now and moving around, and then people like me who it could take months to even get a check if this program's still there in months, because anyway, I'm just saying, like, the logistics of this, I have never had good success. I've never seen it, and it's never worked.
I think we've got it, Caroline. Let's let the Congressman answer your question.
Yeah, Carolyn, so, there's no question logistic of this is going to be huge, but I wouldn't worry about your particular situation because from what I saw, and again, this is just trying to read articles while we're talking, President's talking by April 6th to try to get checks out to people if through this package. So they're going to do something much quicker than they originally were saying, which is the end of April. That's good. And there hasn't been a program like this before, so there's not a check you didn't get. So I am quite sure you will get the check. I think the other point you bring, though, is of concern. How do we get checks to people that may not fall within the system as well? And I think that's part of what they've got to figure out. I don't know if FEMA and others will be involved in order to do that. I don't know any logistics because we don't even know what the proposal is at this point. I do believe, though, that you will be covered, and I wouldn't worry about what number it is on your Social Security number because this is a unique situation and has not been done in my any recent memory of how this will work. So I think everyone will be able to get the check. I wouldn't worry about that.
Mary in Bainbridge Island, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi. I wasn't sure if you're aware that I just was at a meeting. I work at a tribal medical clinic. here in Kitsap County, and we were having a thing with a virus testing. Not only do we need the actual test kits, which at the moment we have 7, which we're saving for the people who are actually working in our clinic, but also we also need the protective gear, which we don't have. And also we just had LabCorp got broken into, so they don't have, they stole all of the equipment and they stole the swabs. So we're really down. So just to let you know, things are really bad around here. Just wanted to let you know, though, that not only do we need the kits, but also the protective gear. So just wanted to let you know it's a little more complicated than just having the kits. So thanks for all the work that both of you do.
Thank you, Marion. I was having a little bit of a hard time understanding you, but someone else mentioned, that some people had stolen some materials, and this is a time that we need to all kind of work together on this. And anyone who tries to take advantage of this is really pretty much the lowest level of humankind to take advantage of a crisis like this. The good news is, I think, with the Defense Production Act, with all of us pushing issues today, we're pushing one. We've been working actually with Scott Gottlieb, the former FDA commissioner, who works at the American Enterprise Institute, not something normally the Progressive Caucus is working with. He came and talked to the Progressive Caucus last week. We are in daily contact with him because he's been a very good and honest player in this and helping us to know where there are some supply chain issues, and we're helping to get that message out to really beat the drum so that that's happening. I do feel right now that we are doing this all rowing together in a good way, so I think the supplies are being addressed, the shortages, and we're doing our very best in getting this information out. But to anyone who would actually steal supplies and things at a time of crisis, really, I can't think of anything more awful, and I hope that we'll be able to fill your supplies very soon.
Yeah, and her point was that she works in a tribal clinic, and they only have 7 test kits available, period, full stop. And
yeah, I mean, so I know there's a part of this is going to be tribal. We just signed a letter today, a 10-page letter, a bipartisan letter, Tom Cole and Deb Haaland, on a number of tribal issues. I was on the phone today with the Ho-Chunk Nation, which are in my district, so we are addressing that, but, Tom, I wish I could find the number of test kits we have in the VA currently across the country. It's a woeful amount. But all of this is ramping up. Yesterday, one of the things we did, I think it's important to share with people, we know there's reagents is one of the issues. We're afraid to have shortages to do the tests we need to. And we have 2 firms we know can do that in district. We reached out to them proactively and found out, and we were able to connect them with the state of Wisconsin, and now they're getting test kits out of production. They just ramped up production with some FDA expedited approval on Friday. There's a lot happening right now, and I think it will be good news. Again, we all wish it happened longer ago, but right now it is happening, and we're trying to keep the very best on top of it.
Yeah, reagents are the chemicals that are used in the test kits themselves. There were some reports of shortages earlier. We just have 45 seconds here before we have to have hard breaks when I'm on remote. So it's swab shortages, test kit shortages. I heard on TV this morning, I believe it was when Governor Cuomo was speaking, that 95% of all the protective equipment used in the United States is manufactured in China. Is anybody talking about starting to open factories in America to make these things? I mean, doesn't this really show how insane this free trade thing that's been going on for the last, since the Reagan administration is?
And this is one of the areas that I think is of good hope is Democrats and Republicans raise supply chain issues on a regular basis now, so everyone's aware of it, and it's a joint effort. So I think long range will be addressing more of these issues. Short range, I think now we are with defense production and some other ways to try to get those things done.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan, co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls in our national town hall meeting, Middays with Mark, every Wednesday, first hour, right here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back. Stick around. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. John in Langley, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi. This is a profit, people over profit time. And Obama, we have a fiat currency, which means our currency is based on the full faith and credit of people. And therefore, Obama looked into the constitutionality of minting trillion-dollar coins and destroying them. What this means is money should not be an issue in a time like this. The talk of debt, the talk of trying to pass bills for certain amounts is nonsense. The time is to simply put money aside. It's our money. Yeah. It's not bank money.
I got it, John. And let me, to all of our callers, please don't use speakerphones. It's really hard to understand what you're saying. Or if you must use a speakerphone, when you talk to us, push the microphone right up to your mouth. Congressman, I don't know if you heard what he was talking about, the $1 trillion coins.
Yeah, I think the part I agree with him on is that, and I think I mentioned it and referenced it earlier, is right now I'm not so concerned about how we pay for some of these things as much as we get the money out and do what we need to do, and we will figure it out. We're the United States of America. We have that ability to, but to try to worry about that at this point is not useful. I had several journalists in the last few weeks, and one, unfortunately, I was not very polite to. I think I said, that's a dumb question, because I think what we're trying to focus on is just getting the aid out. We know we've got to do these things. We'll figure out how to pay for some of this a little bit later, but at a time of crisis, those issues are far less relevant. And the person's right. We need to put more money out right now and just get this done. So I agree with John in Washington.
Yeah, and Japan's debt to GDP ratio has been over 200% for 10, 15 years, and they're still around. Phil in Brookings, South Dakota, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Phil? No Phil. Okay, Jeffrey in Tampa, Florida, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Congressman Tom, appreciate it. My idea is, rather than sending checks, or in addition to sending checks, the administration should call for a 6-month moratorium on mortgages, rents, loans, credit card payments, student loans, hospital bills, etc. Not as a forgiveness, just a deferment with no added interest, so the lenders aren't missing out. But we're not having evictions, etc. No punitive actions for a while. The missed payments will get added back to the end of the loan. We revisit every 6 months until we're recovered. It's just a way to
Jeffrey, we just
spend
have
money back into the economy.
To the break, so let's let Congressman answer. Thank you. Congressman?
Yeah, Jeffrey, I think that's a good idea. Part of what we're looking at right now, I think, some people are trying to do some really big picture ideas like, should we just abolish student loans like many people have wanted to do? I don't know if that's going to be part of the package because we got to get this done quickly, but something that's more along the lines of deferment makes a lot more sense, and I think you're going to see a number of those proposals being put forward and hopefully put forward in some of the packages.
Okay. Maybe I mistimed this. Sean, do we have a minute to go or... Oh, 15 seconds. Okay. I'm just getting used to here, Congressman, instead of having my clock at the studio where I can actually see the automation equipment and I can see where the brakes are and when they're going to hit, having to do it off a little digital clock on my laptop.
No worries.
Thank you. Thank you for understanding. So we'll be back with Congressman Mark Pocan in just a moment. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. It's 49:30. And stick around. Congressman Pocan, Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls in our national town hall meeting every week right here, Middays with Mark. Stick around. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour, Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour on Middays with Mark. And from Mark to Mark, Mark in Sioux City, Wisconsin, or Sauk City, Wisconsin. You're on the air with your Congressman Pocan.
Yes, glad to talk to you, Mark. Has the government finally approved the use of the WHO tests? Is that something that Congress can actually twist President Trump's arm on actually doing? Because this, we're going to be using foreign tests anyway if we're going to go Roche, for Swiss, the Swiss manufacturer. What's wrong with the German manufacturer that apparently has already, from what I've heard, has already been cranking out the WHO tests for corona.
They were selling them to 60 states in early February. Congressman?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have that answer offhand, Mark, other than, there is a big question why we didn't do that 6 weeks ago. The best answer, they said there's some false positives. I don't accept that as a good answer. Right now, though, the test kits that we have in the labs are being set up for our tests. So my guess is the focus will continue because the tests are now produced. The lab capacity is up. We just have to make sure we have the supplies to run the tests, and you might run into some of those issues if you have labs doing multiple tests. So I don't have a clear answer other than I do think some of those issues, while definitely should have been resolved previously, I think we are being able to address with the current tests we have right now. But I'll try to get back to you on that. I don't know offhand.
John, in Santa Fe, is that Texas or New Mexico, John?
No, New Mexico. Big difference on that one.
Okay. Great.
How are you, gentlemen? My question is about how the local businesses here, restaurants and all those, are virtually closing down because we have these restrictions guided by the CDC, 6 foot and smaller tables and whatnot. Meanwhile, we have the airline industry just piling people into these airtight cylinders and going across the country and possibly spreading this thing even worse. I'm wondering if Congress is considering this, or if it would take an executive decision, or how that goes.
Huh.
Yeah,
I
know
wonder if
that
you could pass a law saying that all center seats have to be empty.
Yeah, or something like that. I don't think they're filling a lot of planes right now, from what we understand, other than the immediate surge we had over the weekend as borders were being closed down, and then we saw the problems because they didn't correspond in the airports to process people coming back from overseas. But from what we understand is that's part of the problem is no one is flying, and honestly, no one sane should be flying unless they have to. Unfortunately, we're still hearing about too many young people who think they're invincible taking vacations. Spring break in Florida had a bunch of people at the beach. This is going to prolong not just this crisis, but it's going to cause us to have more economic problems and more problems for our seniors where they're being hit the hardest and people with other health conditions. This is the time that everyone has to quit being selfish. And unfortunately, I can't tell you how many people we're still running into this problem that think they can do this because they're in a category where they may be asymptomatic or it'll just be symptoms like a cold. That's not the point. They're a carrier, and as long as they're a carrier and this continues, they will continue to hurt our economy, and they will continue to put their parents and grandparents at the greatest risk. So that's one that, Tom, I don't know how else to express other than I can't tell you how many times I've got people we're hearing this from, and I don't know how to stop it other than we need to say it over and over. It's time to be not selfish.
Well, and there's a new report out of China. It was just published yesterday looking at thousands of children under the age of 15. And what they found was that even babies were getting this and getting very, very sick. And while it wasn't 17 to 20% who needed respirators and hospitalization, it was as high as 6% among children. Yeah. So there were no deaths, but there was a lot of severe lung injury that'll be lifelong. And that's kids. That's the most invincible, right? So they're still getting sick. And then you see these 20 and 30 and 40-year-olds. The other thing that flipped me out, we just have 40 seconds here. The other thing that flipped me out is this new survey that it was published by YouGov this morning that only about 30% of Fox News viewers think that this is a problem.
Yeah. I'm still seeing it in social media traffic to some degree. Hopefully, now they're listening to the president, the people who get all their information from him. He seems to, the last several days, realize what many of us have realized for a couple months. Hopefully that number will change, but I am still absolutely dumbfounded by the number of people who are high school, college age who are still traveling. The spring break thing is a phenomenon we've got to stop, and everyone needs to help in talking to their loved ones.
I screwed up my time thing. We have another minute and a half here. Susan in Snellville, Georgia. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman. How are you doing?
Hi, Susan. Good. Thank you.
I have a situation, and I have a possible idea. My sister-in-law, we are an immigrant family. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, please, real quick.
Okay. We're an immigrant family. My sister-in-law has signs. The woman that she cleans house for in Buckhead, Atlanta, tested positive for coronavirus because she just got back with her husband from Japan. However, she is not getting the right information. She doesn't understand. She's scared. She has no health care. She lives in a house with 5 people that are still coming and going to work.
So, Susan, we're running out of time here. What's your question?
My sister-in-law is walking around with coughing all over the house, so they don't understand. Can we get the word out better? Can we mail out information? Can we start having stores post?
Okay, let's let the congressman answer the question. He just has 20 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who shows any symptoms should call the health provider to get tested. And I think, we just have to do that person to person at this point. I don't know if we could do a national mailing while we're trying to mail out checks, right? We've got a lot of things to do, but we need to person be able to get this information out. And you should not go to work if you are sick, period. I heard of one employer finally yesterday said that they were having people coughing at work. We all have to stand to this together. And if someone is sick at work, we have to stand up and say they shouldn't be going to work. That's the recommendations, and she should absolutely call a healthcare provider to get tested.
Congressman Pocan, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for putting up with my time dislocations.
No worries.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you so much for being with us. Yeah, always good talking to you. Thank you. We'll be back with with more of the news of the day and your calls as we continue to talk about, surviving in an era and prospering perhaps even, or doing well anyway, in an era of pandemic.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hello, I'm Casey Hobbs.
And I'm Shane Mason, and we're the hosts of Nurse Talk Radio.
Here's what we're talking about this week. Here's a disturbing development. Shane, as you know, we have covered the progress of California's End-of-Life Option Act since...
We say fight back!
Got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these 3 guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson. And the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Ruth Marcus, Supreme Ambition, Brett Kavanaugh and the Conservative Takeover. This is from the prologue. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy had a request. Would President Trump have a few minutes to speak privately? It was April 10th, 2017, a sparkling spring morning in Washington, and Kennedy was at the White House to preside over the ceremonial swearing in of the newest Supreme Court Justice, Neil Gorsuch. First time in history that a sitting justice had sworn in one of his former law clerks to join him on the bench. Just 80 days into Trump's chaotic presidency, the confirmation of Gorsuch represented a rare and welcome victory for the beleaguered new administration, reeling from court defeats of its travel ban and, despite controlling both houses of Congress, unable to repeal President Obama's signature health care law. Perhaps most important, as the prominent conservative lawyers, activists, and judges assembled in the Rose Garden that day understood, Gorsuch's addition was just one step, necessary but not sufficient, in the 3 decades-long conservative bid to cement control over the high court. This effort had been as frustrating as it was lengthy. Seeming opportunities for dominance repeatedly slipped away, with Republican nominees, including Kennedy himself, turning out to be less reliably conservative than advertised. But Republicans have learned from these costly errors, assembling a farm team of potential nominees whose judicial records could be carefully scrutinized to detect any risk of ideological deviation. Gorsuch was among those who came bearing the seal of approval of the Federalist Society, the conservative legal group that had made itself the central actor in this court-shaping exercise and was playing an even more outsized role in the new administration. Trump took pains to single out one man who was not in the Rose Garden that day, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, for all he did to make this achievement possible, quoting Trump. Indeed, everyone present knew that McConnell had been the indispensable man leading to that moment. Had it not been for McConnell, President Obama would have filled the vacancy created by Justice Antonin Scalia's sudden death in February 2016, and Justice Merrick Garland would be sitting on the high court, anchoring a newly fortified liberal majority. McConnell, with his audacious announcement that the opening would not be filled, no matter that Obama had 11 months remaining in his term, had avoided that fateful outcome. His intervention meant that Gorsuch now occupied Scalia's seat, a conservative for conservative swap. The next vacancy was almost certain to be the far more critical one, shifting the court's balance instead of affirming it. On that score, all eyes were on the 80-year-old Kennedy, then serving his 30th year on the high court, and by dint of age, years of service, and political allegiance, the most likely to depart. The swing justice on an already conservative court, Kennedy was pleased about Gorsuch, but he had another former law clerk in mind as he was ushered into Trump's private dining room for an unusual session with the president and White House counsel Don McGahn. Justices are routinely invited to the White House for social events, state dinners, and holiday parties, but at least until Trump took office, such one-on-one meetings were rare in the modern era. With its finicky notions about preserving the appearance of judicial independence, unlike the relaxed days when justices did double duty as private counselors to presidents such as Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson. In the chronically leaky Trump White House, aides took pains to keep the Trump-Kennedy meetings secret. There were no public reports about the session, and only a few senior officials ever learned what Kennedy said to Trump that day. The justice's message to the president was as consequential as it was straightforward, and it was a remarkable insertion by a sitting justice into the distinctly presidential act of judge picking. As a candidate, Trump had upended tradition by issuing a list of judges. It ultimately grew to 21, including Gorsuch, from which he pledged to pick his Supreme Court nominees. Now Kennedy had a recommendation for Trump's list. "You named one of my former clerks," Kennedy told Trump. "You should think about another one, Brett Kavanaugh." When Anthony Kennedy spoke, the Trump White House listened, with good reason. During the campaign, when Trump, against all expectations, emerged as the Republican nominee and ultimate victor over Hillary Clinton, the issue of judicial selection had been a utilitarian means to an electoral end. The socially conservative and evangelical voters Trump needed to win were deeply, understandably suspicious of the thrice-married, once Democratic New Yorker. They were particularly dubious about how Trump would approach the critical task of shaping the federal judiciary, especially the Supreme Court. The list of high court candidates that Trump produced with the help of the Federalist Society, upending convention with typical Trumpian bravado, was explicitly aimed at calming their concerns, and it succeeded beyond the wildest expectations of its creators. On Election Day, more than a quarter of Trump voters identified the Supreme Court as the critical factor in determining their vote. White, evangelical, born-again Christians broke 81% for Trump to 16% for Hillary Clinton, meaning that Trump outperformed previous Republican nominees Mitt Romney, John McCain, and George W. Bush among such voters. In office, Trump not only keenly understood the politics of judicial selection and its importance for his reelection, he also gained a new appreciation for what the Supreme Court meant to a president's legacy. Thanks to McConnell's ruthlessness, Trump had inherited what no president had before, the gift of an existing vacancy. Supreme Ambition by Ruth Marcus. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And I want to catch up on a whole bunch of things here. And then we'll, also be taking your phone calls. We've kind of gone into anything goes coronavirus. But anyway, I'm broadcasting from home. Louise and I are sheltering in place. We've been doing so for a couple of weeks now. It's been, I think, maybe a month and a half. I've been suggesting that you might want to think about rearranging your life to the extent that you can. I realize many people, in fact, probably most people can't. And this is a big challenge for our country. And a large part of that challenge is the absolute and utter failure of this administration to allow us to test for this virus, back in January, February, or, up until this week. And so we're just now starting to discover how bad the situation is in the United States, and it's going to be a mess. But that said, there are a lot of things that we can do. So, for example, I needed to get a haircut, and yesterday, literally for the first time in her life, Louise cut somebody's hair, mine. So, this is cool. I mean, we're learning how to live together and to live, cautiously, quietly in our times. I did want to mention, by the way, I just got an email from Bernie Sanders' campaign. Dear friends, no sugarcoating it. Last night didn't go the way we wanted. And while our campaign has won the battle of ideas, we're losing the battle over electability to Joe Biden. So he says Bernie and Jane are going to go back to Vermont after today's congressional business and holding conversations with supporters to get input and assess our path forward. So that's that. There were 3 states that held elections yesterday, and in each one, Joe Biden won big. There was a great piece that was posted over on DU earlier today, and I thought, I wanted to share this with you. It really kind of highlights how we need to be thinking of this. And I'll just read it. Many years ago, a student asked the anthropologist Margaret Mead what she considered to be the first true sign of civilization in a culture. And the student was expecting Margaret Mead, the great anthropologist, to be talking about pots and hooks or clay pots or whetstones or whatever. But instead, Mead said the first sign of civilization in an ancient culture was a femur thigh bone that had healed from a break. She said, in the animal kingdom, if you break your leg, you die, period, full stop. You can't run from danger. You can't get to the river to drink water. You can't hunt for food. And injured animals or humans become fresh meat for predators. But she said a broken femur that is healed is evidence that someone cared for the injured, treated the wound, took the person to safety, fed them, took care of them, and cared for them until they recovered. Helping someone through difficulty is where civilization begins, said Margaret Mead. And I think that is just so very, very true. So, that said, we also have to acknowledge exactly where we are right now. On this program last week, I think it was Thursday or Friday, I said words to the effect of get ready for unemployment levels that are going to be at or worse than the Republican Great Depression. And get ready for a stock market failure that could be worse than the Republican Great Depression. And plan for the worst and hope and work for the best. And that's become my motto. Plan for the worst and hope and work for the best. And, a couple people sent me or tweeted at me saying, yeah, you're spreading fear. During the first 2 years of the Republican Great Depression, unemployment hit 20%. That's bad, right? 1 in 5 people out of work. And by 1933, it was up to over 35%, I believe. Franklin Roosevelt said a third of Americans were not working. Back then, we didn't measure these things as accurately as we do now. But Steve Mnuchin, the former foreclosure king in California, who threw thousands and thousands of people out of their homes with robo-signed documents illegally, he is now our Treasury Secretary, and on Monday he said we could see 20% unemployment. Frankly, I think we're going to see that within a matter of weeks. And because we are looking at a crisis of, frankly, Republican Great Depression, and yes, that's what they called it right up until the 1950s. They called it the Republican Great Depression. It wasn't until Republican Dwight Eisenhower became president that people stopped referring to it as the Republican Great Depression and just called it the Great Depression. And what we're seeing right now are in my opinion, because we're seeing Great Depression levels of collapse, we're going to need Great Depression levels of stimulus. So what was that? Well, when the Great Depression started, our national debt was pretty much non-existent. The Great Depression ended right after World War II. World War II was the giant government program that finally got us completely out of the Great Depression. Franklin Roosevelt's programs got unemployment from 35% down to around 10%. And then it went back up to around 12%, as I recall. I'm doing this from memory. In 37, when he dialed back, and then he went full bore again, and unemployment started going back down again. But it went to virtually nothing during World War II because everybody was working. And they were either in the army fighting or they were working. And speaking of World War II, this new report out. Well, I'll get to that in just a minute. So if we're looking at that level of problem, if we're looking at a Great Depression level potential for unemployment and loss of wealth, basically, collapse of the stock market, then we need to be talking Great Depression levels of stimulus. $1 trillion is nothing. That's like trying to stop an elephant with a .22 or a pea shooter. I mean, it's just a terrible metaphor. We all love elephants, but you understand what I'm saying. Instead of talking about giving every American $1,000 or $2,000, when this new report out, a government report within our own federal government, this was given to Donald Trump last week, saying that this could last 18 months or longer, where people can't work, that the sickness will come in waves, that we are going to experience supply shortages. I mean, this is really serious stuff we're talking about here. And we can't sugarcoat this. Sugarcoating it is what got us to this crisis right now. Trump doing his BS happy talk on Fox News and holding his press conferences saying, oh, I got this under control and it's all good and there's only 5 cases. And today calling it the Chinese virus. Chinese people of Asian ancestry broadly, are being harassed on the streets because of Trump's rhetoric. And he's still using this racist rhetoric, and he was defending it this morning in his press conference. But the bottom line, we need to be looking, if we're going to put this country back together, or if we're just going to hold our finger in the dike, Trump should not be doing what Herbert Hoover did in 1929, 1930, and 1931, and 1932. The market collapsed in October of 29. The whole economy started to collapse in January, February, March of 1930. It slid down all through 1930, all through 1931. By 1932, early 1932, we were at 20% unemployment. By the end of 1932, early 1933, as Franklin Roosevelt was coming into office, we were at 5% unemployment. Why? Because the Republican Herbert Hoover said it's not the role of government to fix the economy. It's not the role of government to help out the people. The role of government should be limited to the Army, the police, and the fire department. That was the Republican perspective then. That, by the way, is the Republicans' perspective right now. This is why in the House of Representatives, Louis Gohmert is trying to block this little tiny $800 billion stimulus bill that the Democrats passed last week, where they stayed up until 11 o'clock at night to do it, and Mitch McConnell still has not taken it to the floor of the Senate. But Louis Gohmert is trying to block it in the House, and Rand Paul is blocking it in the Senate. As Mitch McConnell is saying, well, yeah, okay, I guess we can look at this. And Rand Paul is saying, no, you won't. And he's using procedural methods to try to prevent this from getting to the floor. Congress needs to take this seriously. And particularly if you have Republican members of Congress. The number for Congress is 202-224-3121. 202-224-3121. Call them up and say, get this damn thing fixed. Or what we're going to see, and thank God there's only another year of it to go, not even a year. January 20th can't come fast enough for me. But what we're looking at here is Herbert Hooverism. Yes, Herbert Hoover actually put together a program to help people out, but it was way too little and way too late. And that's what Trump is doing now.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So anyhow, how can we best basically shelter in place and emotionally survive through all this? I'll be talking about that right after the break. Stick around. And welcome back. Grady in Medford, Oregon. Hey, Grady, what's on your mind today?
Let me get you off speakerphone real quick. Yeah, can you hear
Grady, I'll put you on hold here. I don't let people say that on the air. Rick in Mansfield, Ohio. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom.
Hey, what's up?
Just quick things. I had heard
Put your microphone
last night,
closer to your mouth, Rick, please.
are you aware of any way this is affecting the southern borders, and are they still bringing immigrants in and putting in these holding camps?
Yeah, the kids in cages and the adults in cages are, there's hundreds of thousands of them in these private prisons that are very, very profitable. The prison companies are charging you and me, the taxpayers, up to $700 a day for these jail cells that these people, mostly refugees. We're no longer seeing people from Mexico coming to the United States looking for jobs. We haven't seen that in years. The economy in Mexico has actually been doing fairly well, although the coronavirus is going to hit them too. But these detention centers, both for adults and children, are just, this is insane what's going on. And they're petri dishes just waiting for an explosion, for a meltdown. So, we've got to do something about that. McLean in Chino Valley, Arizona, watching on Free Speech TV. Hey, McLean, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, I was wondering, perhaps you've heard something that I've missed, but during this crisis, I've heard the National Guard being called in by some states, and suggestions that the military should become fully involved. But where's FEMA? Isn't this their forte, supposedly?
It is, and frankly, I don't even know who the director of FEMA is now. I'd bet it's some lobbyist, that Trump brought into the administration. But when he declared a national emergency, I believe it was Monday, maybe it was last Friday. The time is kind of blurring to me. What he did was he opened up a $40 billion FEMA fund. And FEMA, in theory, could be helping, could be collaborating, as the governor of New York keeps begging, with, for example, the Army Corps of Engineers to do something. But I haven't seen any evidence that that's happening right now, McLean. They should be, though. Thank you for the call. Grady, you want to try it again in Medford, Oregon?
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate you taking my phone call. You are a rare voice of unifying common sense in this time of national crisis. Man, we've got to really do something together to get rid of
Thank you. We have just 40 seconds, Grady. Quick one.
Okay, yeah, okay. My question, Tom, is I saw that Jack Ma, Alibaba founder, has donated 1 million face masks and 500,000 COVID test kits. And I saw a picture of them sitting on pallets on the dock in Long Beach. How can we get them out of that dock? And are they going to get out of the dock? And can we get them to where they need them? And I'll take my comment off the air.
I heard that Jack Ma was... Thanks, Grady. Thanks. I heard that Jack Ma was calling for something like this and was offering to do something. I didn't know if it was here in the United States or somewhere else. He's a Chinese billionaire and a bit of a philanthropist. And I think but I haven't seen the link on that they were actually here in Long Beach. Where did you find that information, Grady?
I was just nightly news last night, and it showed them wrapped in red plastic sitting on the dock in Long Beach. They're here.
Huh. Okay, so you saw it on TV. Interesting. I'll have to do some searching on the internet on that. Grady, let me find out what the details are, and I'll get back with you. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at ThomHartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I wanted to talk about living and loving and caring and being there for friends and family and each other during a time of shelter in place and great fear, frankly. I mean, this report, this federal report, in fact, I've got it here, which is very, very concerning, is suggesting that there could be as many as 2 million dead Americans as a result of this coronavirus. That's more than all the people who died in the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, the War of 1812, the World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, and all the wars in the Middle East, the Bush wars, Bush Elder and Bush Jr. You add all those wars together, and it's not 2 million dead Americans. So coronavirus could kill more people in this country than all our wars together. And there's one report out of the Imperial College of London that basically says this. There's another report that's coming out of the U.S. government itself that's saying basically the same thing. And this is, very concerning. So what do we do? How do we avoid being one of those casualties? Well, the number one thing is to shelter in place, as San Francisco is mandating, and five or six counties in the Bay Area are now mandating. This is going to come to a community near you. And frankly, the sooner it does, the better. And if you can shelter in place, you should start doing it immediately. And that means, finding ways to get food delivered, finding ways to get the necessities delivered, figuring out what your own necessities are. I mean, we, this morning, Louise and I were like, maybe we need to stop using oat milk in our coffee because we're just about to run out. And so we're going to go to black coffee. We bought a whole, pounds and pounds of coffee beans the other day. But, I think beyond that, there is how to deal with the loneliness of social isolation. Because shelter in place, what we're talking about is social isolation. And loneliness can be really destructive. I mean, if you look at the studies, loneliness is as bad for your health as smoking. Loneliness will predict mortality more accurately than does obesity. These are serious problems, and but it's really kind of, and Amanda Ripley wrote a great piece for the Washington Post about this, by the way, which is one of my sources of information on this that I commend to you. She said, it sounds like a trap, but it's more like a balancing act. And now is the time that we all need to be talking about what we can do to combat loneliness. And it's not just, I know, many people are going to be sheltering in place all alone. Many are going to be like Louise and I, sheltering in place with their spouse. And loneliness can create this toxic chain reaction in our body. Fear causes stress hormones. So what are the antidotes? Well, Amanda Ripley suggests 4 things, and I endorse these. First, she says anyone who can exercise should do more of it now, every day. Physical exercise reduces stress. It boosts your immune functions. And outdoor activities are great. Go for a walk. Just stay away from people. Louise and I there's a trail, a path that runs along the Columbia River that we've been walking on for years. It's about a 1.5 mile walk. If we can, depending on where we enter the trail, we can make it a 2 mile walk or a 1 mile walk or a 1.5 mile walk. And we do that every day. And now we're finding that when we meet people on the path who are going in the opposite direction, they used to say hi and we'd walk right by each other. Now they're stepping off the trail so we can be 6 feet apart. And we're doing that too, but still walking, getting out there. It boosts immune function, it helps things out. You can also, she says, my current gym is on the phone, right? There's online yoga classes, there's exercise classes, you got this stuff all over YouTube. Second, social closening. It's actually coming closer to people, not physically, but using your phone, using Skype. She said, your phone is your lifeline. I've set a personal goal to actually talk, not text, with 1 to 2 friends or family members by the telephone every day until this pandemic ends. This gives, and the coronavirus gives us an excuse to check in. The third is mindfulness, basically meditation. Meditation reduces inflammation, enhances immune functions. There's evidence that prayer has the same effect. So meditation and prayer, and if you're not real clear on how to do that, there's some great how-tos on the internet on how to do mindfulness meditation. You don't need to pay for anything. You don't need an app for it. There's just no shortage of information. And YouTube videos as well. You don't need to join a cult or anything weird like that. And fourth, do things for other people. Find things that you can do for other people. In Ireland, a woman, she writes, named Helen Rahali has helped organize nearly 6,000 volunteers to help elderly and immune-compromised people get groceries almost entirely through Twitter. In Louisville, Erin Hinson is matching volunteers with people in need using Google Docs. So she says this is the golden hour after disaster, a chance to come together and build resilience. She says we have to seize the opportunity without fear. Viruses may be contagious, but fear can be contagious too. We will make it through this. And at the top of the next hour, I've got a pretty good rant put together here about how our economy has been constructed and how we can reconstruct it. Because I see at the end of this, everybody in America, even the people watching Fox News and listening to right-wing hate radio, are starting to realize that these systems that have been put in place, over the last 40 years, with Reagan's adoption of Reaganism and two Democratic presidents that were not able to repeal it. So we're still operating under Reaganism. We're still operating under neoliberal economics rather than the old Keynesian economics, which was Keynesian economics from 1932 to 1981, people-centered, worker-centered. Reaganomics, corporate-centered, billionaire-centered. And we're still there. And people are now starting to look around and go, what the hell? Seriously? You want to bail out the airlines, but not the people who work for the airlines? I mean, you want to bail out the banks, but not the people the banks are trying to foreclose on? And this is what happened in 2008. The banks got bailed out, but how many homeowners got bailed out? Zero. It's like our priorities are completely wrong. Here's an opportunity to fix them because now we've got this massive nationwide wake-up going on. So, reach out to your friends, not physically, but reach out to friends and family. Give people virtual hugs, talk to them on the phone, listen a lot, and be there for people. We can all do this. We can all get through this, my friend.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And I'd add, what are you doing for social closening? How are you getting through this? Let's talk about some positive things, too, after the break. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Ezra Klein's new book, Why We're Polarized. This is from the introduction, and it's a couple pages into it. I'm starting out here. I have found that American politics is best understood by braiding two forms of knowledge that are often left separate. The direct on-the-ground insights shared by politicians, activists, government officials, and other subjects of my reporting, and the more systemic analyses conducted by political scientists, sociologists, historians, and others with the time, methods, and expertise to study American politics at scale. On their own, political actors often ignore the incentives shaping their decisions, and academic researchers miss the human motivations that drive political decision-making. Together, however, they shine bright light on how and why American politics works the way it does. There's much awry in American politics, and I won't in this book attempt to catalog all of it. But I've come to believe the master story, the one that drives almost all divides and most fundamentally shapes the behavior of participants, is the logic of polarization. That logic, put simply, is this. To appeal to a more polarized public, political institutions and political actors behave in more polarized ways. As political institutions and actors become more polarized, they further polarize the public. This sets off a feedback cycle. To appeal to a yet more polarized public, institutions must polarize further. When faced with yet more polarized institutions, the public polarizes further, and so on. Understanding that we exist in relationship with our political institutions, that they are changed by us and we are changed by them, is the key to this story. We don't just use politics for our own ends. Politics uses us for its own ends. There are many different types of polarization possible, and I'll discuss some of them later in the book, but the locus of polarization I'll discuss is on political identity. And that requires saying a few words about a term that should be very useful in American politics, but that has become almost useless: identity politics. A core argument of this book is that everyone engaged in American politics is engaged in identity politics. This is not an insult, and it's not controversial. We form and fold identities constantly, naturally. Identity is present in politics in the way gravity, evolution, or cognition is present in politics. That is to say, it is omnipresent in politics because it is omnipresent in us. There is no way to read the literature on how humans form and protect their personal and group identities, literature I will survey in this book, and believe that any of us is immune. It runs so deep in our psyches, so activated so easily, even weak cues and distant threats, that it is impossible to speak seriously about how we engage with one another without discussing how our identities shape that engagement. Unfortunately, the term identity politics has been weaponized. It is most often used by speakers to describe politics as practiced by members of historically marginalized groups. If you're black and you're worried about police brutality, that's identity politics. If you're a woman and you're worried about the male-female pay gap, that's identity politics. But if you're a rural gun owner decrying universal background checks as tyranny, or a billionaire CEO complaining that high tax rates demonize success, or a Christian insisting on nativity scenes in public squares, well, that's just good old-fashioned politics. With a quick sleight of hand, identity becomes something that only marginalized groups have. The term identity politics in this usage obscures rather than illuminates. It's used to diminish and discredit the concerns of weaker groups by making them look self-interested. Special pleading in order to clear the agenda for the concerns of stronger groups, which are framed as more rational, proper topics for normal political debate. But in wielding identity as a blade, we have lost it as a lens, blinding ourselves in a bid for political advantage. We're left searching in vain for what we refuse to allow ourselves to see. All politics is influenced by identity. Those identities are most powerful when they are so pervasive as to be either invisible or uncontroversial. American is an identity. So too is Christian. When politicians, including the irreligious, end speeches with "God bless America," it's not because they're making an appeal to a higher power, but because they're making an appeal to our bedrock identities. If you don't believe me, ask yourself why there are so few open atheists or even agnostics in national politics. This does not mean that politics is an equation solved by locating identity. Identity shapes our worldview, but it does not mechanistically decide it. And while we often speak of identity as a singular, it is always a dizzying plural. We have countless identities, some of them in active conflict with each other, others lying dormant until activated by threat or fortune. Much that happens in political campaigns is best understood as a struggle over which identities voters will inhabit come election day. Will they feel like workers exploited by their bosses, or heartlanders dismissed by coastal elites? Will they vote as patriotic traditionalists offended by NFL players who kneel during the national anthem, or as parents worried about the climate their children will inhabit? What we are often fighting over in American politics is group identity and status, fights that express themselves in debates over policy and power, but cannot be truly reconciled by either. Health policy is positive sum, but identity conflict is zero sum. The book Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein. What's the truth on coronavirus testing? And why has Trump refused to accept the World Health Organization test that the entire rest of the planet is using? Linda St. Louis is here on how the insurer's conduct is outrageous on the coronavirus pandemic. Robert Weissman joins in on how Public Citizen and 70 organizations are calling on Trump to prevent Big Pharma from profiteering on coronavirus. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear is also here about the ongoing Fukushima disaster. And in Geeky Science, find out what happens if you walk just 30 minutes a day. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever you find great podcasts. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Before I pick up your phone calls, I just want to bring you up to date. Trump did a press conference this morning. It's becoming really obvious to me that the problem that we have with this president is not like with Ronald Reagan, that he has an ideology, that he's trying to turn America into basically a right-wing neoliberal country where the economy works for the billionaires and blah-de-blah. The problem is Because Reagan actually knew what it meant to be president. He understood that he was governing. He was governing in a direction that, in retrospect now 40 years out, we can look back and see was disastrous for our country. And continues to be, because we're still in this Reaganism era. But he understood governing. He understood legislation. He understood the processes. He had been a governor. He knew what he was doing. Trump thinks being president means you're the host of the world's biggest reality show. Honest to God, I have come to this absolute belief that that's what he thinks. And so every day, he jumps out there. He's got to be at the top of the headlines every day, literally 7 days a week, and he has been for 3 years. Always grabbed the news cycle. And this morning he hops out there and he's the host of the show. And his sycophants come up and they say a few things, and then he comes, oh yeah, we got a hospital ship coming. Well, after the press conference, we discover the hospital ship is in maintenance. It's in dry dock. Oh, really? Here's a verbatim quote from this morning's press conference. I got a 95% approval rating in the Republican Party, 53% overall. Not bad considering I get nothing but fake and corrupt news day and night. Russia, Russia, Russia. Then the Ukraine scam, where's that whistleblower? The impeachment hoax, and more. Also, according to the Daily Caller, I'm leading Sleepy Joe Biden in Florida 48 to 42%. That's what he said when he was supposed to be updating us on what he's doing about a condition that is literally killing Americans as we speak, is about to overwhelm our hospitals. And this is not speculation, this is a certainty. Many of our hospitals, probably most of our hospitals. And we have a game show host running our country. It's shocking. Anyhow, I see, let's see here, Dave in Good, Wisconsin. Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. It's been a while since I've talked to you. I'm 68 years old, just turned the last week, and I live alone. I just got laid off from a job that I was really enjoying, associated with a lot of people. I'm going to miss that, but I have been taking the same advice you just got done talking about. I practice yoga daily. I just took a 2-mile walk in the woods this morning, and I'm trying to eat right, exercise, that sort of thing, and I'm going to have to do that because this, I know it's going to come to the point where I'm really going to miss people. But I am staying in touch with a lot of people, which is good, and I'm going to try to continue to do that. But anyway, the point when I talked to your screener, I wanted to make, I found out this morning, listening to Amy Goodman, some of the stuff that's not being talked about. The Trump administration has decided to ramp up the economic sanctions against Iran. Right now, they've got a big, major problem with this virus, and we don't need to do that. And if anything, we should be helping them, or at least backing off, because this virus doesn't have borders. It's just ridiculous.
Well, also what he's doing, Dave, to the extent that he punishes Iran, that's the extent to which Iran is going to open their arms to China.
Well, yeah, and that we're not making any friends. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, it's a bad thing. Dave, thanks for the call. And developing positive daily habits, routines, that are good, and reaching out to people. Dave, thank you for the call. I said to Louise this morning, I'm going to try and hug you more, and because little things become big things when you're just confined together all the time. And little things that are like annoyances can become anger. And on the other hand, little things that are just a little bit of affection can become, a really positive, oh, yeah, okay, thank you. Mark in Costa Mesa, California. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. It's an honor to talk to you.
Thank you. Back at you.
I called a friend of mine this weekend. He works at the Marriott next to Disneyland in California. And he told me that their attendance of guests was 2%, and there's 1,030 rooms. That's 20 rooms. And he said that the bellmen were just one day a week. So
Marriott announced massive layoffs yesterday.
Yeah, and that brings me over to Trump, who, and it's one of 100 reasons why he should not be president, especially right now, because his main concern, in my opinion, his number one concern is he's desperately trying to get bills passed that will help put taxpayer money into his hotels. And then also another opportunity he has is to get together with his rich friends that have the same situation he has, that are also desperate in desperate times. How can he help them? And so this person is not a person for the people. He doesn't act like he even cares about people. So this is all my opinion. This is me thinking. I'm not being paid by anybody to think otherwise. I can think and say what I think, what I believe is, and so I really think that there should be some efforts on both sides of the fence to get this guy out of D.C. and take McConnell with him.
I think you're seeing that. I mean, Mitt Romney coming out and speaking out against him. He's the only Republican who was willing to. And then, I believe it was on Friday, saying we should give $1,000 to every American, which is huge for a Republican to say. But Mitt Romney at least has some humanity in him. I may disagree with him on policy and politics. And, I'm very glad that Barack Obama beat him in the election. But all that said, he has some humanity, and Donald Trump is a sociopath, and that's a double danger for America. Mark, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. Damon in Las Vegas. Oh, there we go. Damon. Hey, Damon, what's up?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah, what's up?
Okay, so I'm gonna try to get this as quick as I can. So I've been doomsday prepping for this since January, and I got about 7 months worth of stuff here, which is nothing compared to be clear. But anyway, and one of my I'm in AA. I've been in recovery for about 5 years now, and my mentor and AA sponsor is Trump is his daddy. And, so I've been trying to talk to him and other people in AA. And pretty much the AA unit I'm getting to my point, are Trump supporters. And I've been trying to talk to them. And this goes back to what you're saying about Fox News. And they would listen to me. So yesterday he calls me and he tells me his 27-year-old daughter, and who is a dental hygienist, and her husband, who is a dentist, have COVID-19. And 2 points I want to make when I call this. Number one, it's like they always say, no one cares about something till it affects them. And you think these Trump supporters are going to fall away until it affects them? I don't. I saw it for the last 2 months. They don't care. Trump is their daddy. And number two, we live in a society where no one cares about no one. Well, this is a Caucasian family. His daughter, I've seen her a couple of times, is a Barbie doll. She's a dental hygienist, college educated. Her husband is a doctor. They have every advantage in the world. And COVID-19 didn't care about their race, how much money they have. You get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
This is something
I do. Yeah. Yep, I get it. And you said it well, Damon. Damon, thank you for the call, and thanks for watching us on YouTube. Bobby in Yonkers, New York. Hey, Bobby, what's up?
Yeah, I'm a union technician employed by Verizon in Westchester County, and part of our area is New Rochelle, which people know is kind of a hot spot.
Right. It's a hot spot
for infection, and people have been in their homes, and most of my guys that I work with do residential installs. So what they do is you go from house to house, and we do phone, internet, and video. With they call it FiOS.
I get it, Bobby. I need you to get to the point because we've got 30 seconds until we hit a break.
The point is, there's no protocols for my guys when they're out in the field. They have no.
So your utility company is not telling people what to do or anything.
Well, they're asking people. They're asking for volunteers for New Rochelle, but I don't think anyone's taken it. But it doesn't stop at New Rochelle. Westchester County is a very populated area.
Yeah.
So
people should be, at the very least, they should be wearing gloves and they should get masks.
They're not getting anything. I mean, and listen, I was an industrial hygienist. You need training for respirators and things like that, but they're not even getting hand washing stuff.
Oh man, this is and without any federal leadership or guidance, Communities just don't know what to do. This is such a tragedy. Bobby, I'm so sorry to hear that. I wish you well. I'll need to say a prayer for those people who are out there doing that kind of work. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Not only are they putting themselves at risk when they go into people's homes, but if they get infected and don't know it, they can be putting other people at risk if they don't wear a mask. I mean, it's crazy. Thank you. Ron in Sophia, North Carolina. Hey, Ron, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
I'm well. What's on your mind?
I wanted to respond to your stimulus talk you was talking about a while ago, about 30 minutes ago. I was watching the Don Lemon show last night, and he had Scaramucci and Andrew Yang on there, and he was talking about the $1 trillion stimulus, and Scaramucci said that Trump needed to add $3 million to that and made it a $4 million total.
You mean
$4 trillion total injection immediately to help the small business and the people, not the big corporations, the big companies. And I totally 100% agree with him. What do you think?
Me too. What I proposed this morning on our daily post, which is over at BuzzFeed.com and and our Facebook page, is that the Congress should be looking at $15 to $20 trillion spaced out over the next 12 to 18 months, because that's what it's going to take. We are in for a hell of a ride here. It's going to last a year and a half, according to both the studies out of the UK and the studies done by the Trump administration itself. And during that 18 months, we need average people in America to have a net under them. We need something to hold everybody up. And that means, strengthening Social Security. It means, long-term unemployment. It means direct cash payments to literally every man, woman, and child in America. And this is not to stimulate the economy. That's not going to happen. The economy is going to be in recession for a long time, at least throughout this entire period, because people are going to have a hard time buying things other than, by delivery. But what it will do is it'll prevent people from losing their homes. It'll prevent them from going into bankruptcy. It'll prevent them from losing their homes, I guess, is the biggest thing, or losing their cars and things like that. I mean, we need to put a moratorium on debt. We need to be giving people cash. Ron, thank you for the call. Russ in Portland. Hey, Russ, what's up?
Tom, hi. I was in the presence of a doctor yesterday, routine visit. I judge this doctor to be exceptionally bright, and because I'm the son of a physician and the nephew of a physician and the son of a nurse, I think I'm in a little bit better position to judge these things than the average layperson. This doctor told me that the coronavirus is way more transmissible than what the American people are being told by the government and the mainstream media. They're putting out this idea that if somebody coughs or sneezes, if they're 6 feet away from you, the droplets go to the floor, everything's cool. No. You can walk into a Trader Joe's 2 hours after somebody sneezed or coughed, you can get it. And we are in for a really bad situation in this country based on the information.
Well, and it's not just the biggest problem, Russ, is that with the common cold and the flu, you might get infected on Monday, and on Saturday you start showing symptoms, which means that on Friday you were contagious. You're contagious typically a day before you get symptoms with the common cold and the flu. With this coronavirus, you are contagious the day after you're infected, which can be as much as 14 to 20 days before you start showing symptoms. All that time you're infecting other people. That's why it's so radically transmissible. Yeah. Russ, I got to run, but thank you for the call. I mean, this is the problem, and this needs to be repeated over and over and over again. And I don't think this administration is doing a good enough job of telling people what the science is telling us. We'll be right back. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Francis in Seattle. Hey, Francis, what's on your mind today?
Really quickly, I just want to thank you for walking your blues away and for ADHD, A Different Perspective.
You're welcome.
Medical. I worked in medical for 30 years, and I used those books so much, gave away copies. Anyway.
I think they're two of the most important books I've written, along with Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. You know, they're
and your books on the government helped me understand why our system goes sideways so often. So those were great, too. But I didn't use them at work.
What's up, Francis?
What's up is that, I was in healthcare when the AIDS epidemic started. And at first, they were saying that men couldn't get it from sex with a woman. And I was living in a house with about 8 other people because I was way in debt and because of my training. And I had these 2 male housemates who both had possibly been exposed to AIDS, but were just having sex with as many women as they could and not informing the women. And, I'd talk to them about it, and they say, well, it's their problem. It's not my problem. So the day that the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly came out, because there wasn't the internet then, so that was like the latest news, that it came out once a week. The day it came out and said that somebody had documented a female-to-male transmission, I photocopied it, a couple of copies, took it home, and pinned it on their door. And they both turned green when they read it, which I must say I sort of enjoyed. But the thing about infectious disease is that human beings, we have these cognitive misperceptions that make us underestimate risk. So people will try to keep things the same. And we're not very good at being in the state of not knowing and being cautious.
Yeah, and we underestimate some kinds of risk, and we overestimate other kinds of risk. And those things are, I've been seeing a lot of stuff on TV about how we overestimate risk. But I think your point that we underestimate, we're seeing that right now, particularly with people who watch Fox News, listen to right-wing hate radio, and people who think that because they're under 30, they're not going to get sick or they're not going to die. And they're absolutely wrong. And it's just a tragedy. Francis, thank you. Thanks for sharing your story. It was a good one. Will in Broomfield, Colorado. Hey, Will, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. First thing on my mind, and we've actually talked about this before, is the Fourth Turning by Strauss and Howe, when it talks about the great catastrophic event at about this time in American history that forces a sea change. One of the things I remember from that book is that the authors said, we cannot predict what that event will be. Nobody foresaw the Civil War. Nobody foresaw World War II. I don't think anybody could have predicted that this kind of transformative event would be a virus. But
although there were some people, Laurie Garrett and others have been predicting this for some time. But yes, I get your point. But and that's why it's such a great opportunity. And that was the point that Strauss and Howe made in their book, is that every one of those 80-year cycles, the country moves forward in a great leap, in a more progressive direction, a more positive direction. After the Revolutionary War, we were an independent republic. After the Civil War, African Americans were granted, beyond
the right
freedom.
to vote.
And a whole bunch of other things, And although it didn't, last, but then, we saw the same thing after the Great Depression, and I think that that's going to happen after this. Excellent points, Will. Thank you for the call. Doris in Oakland. Hey, Doris, what's up?
Hi. I really am concerned that we're sort of letting what they say, letting the perfect be the enemy of the adequate. We don't have as many masks as we need, but any face covering will help. And we could legislate, look, if you're out in public, you should have face covering on. Even if it's like a cowl neck scarf that you just pull up over your face, because anything that stops my breath from letting droplets go out into the air and onto surfaces, it won't stop me from getting infected from you, but it'll stop me from infecting you.
Correct. And a lot of people are walking around spreading these things, not realizing it because they're not showing symptoms yet. That's why this disease is so rapidly spreading. In Georgia, there's a hospital in Georgia, was in the news this morning, where the nurses are sewing together their own masks because the hospital is completely out of masks. I mean, this is where we go with this. Thanks a lot for the call, Doris. Barry in Chicago. Hey, Barry, got a minute and a half. What's up?
Yeah, sure, Tom. I just want to express my concern that I'm a physician in the Chicago area. Yesterday there were primaries in Illinois, and the day before I was standing in line with 100 people in a crowded hallway, including the elderly, trying to vote. And of course, it suppressed the turnout greatly in Illinois, which perhaps was the objective. But I think it's highly irresponsible of Tom Perez and the DNC and our Governor, J.B. Pritzker, to move ahead with elections in a pandemic. And I think it sends the wrong message to the American people. It's sort of like vote or die. You know, we challenge you to vote or die. And I can't believe it, and I don't understand, but I think it's a horrible thing.
I do too, and I think that probably, well, we'll see. My guess is that Bernie Sanders is going to pull the plug on his campaign, and that'll be the end of the primaries. But I went on the air yesterday, and, you know, we're on the air in Chicago on WCPT, huge station with a lot of listeners, and I felt physically, you know, tightened up having to say, you know, I recommend you don't go vote. If you know, let the people who voted by mail, you know, the absentee voters, let them be the ones who decide this primary. Don't go, you know, out and stand in line with 100 people, and don't be touching a touch screen and all that kind of stuff. I mean, this is, you know, how can the government say, you know, don't be in a crowd of more than 10 people and then have 100 people in line to vote? It makes no sense. So
I agree.
Barry, what kind of doc are you?
I think I'm an ophthalmologist actually, but I did study epidemiology, you know, in my earlier years, and that obviously makes no sense. I think Tom Perez and everybody else are responsible, but I do think Bernie will pull the plug as a public service. I think because he cares about people, you know. I agree.
That's my guess too. Although I don't want to be, you know, in the position of, you know, pushing him to do so. But
no, I agree.
Sense. Yeah. Thanks, Barry. Thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you, and great to hear from a doc. We'll be back. I want to talk to you about some of the common household products that can destroy this coronavirus, and the economy, and, you know, what we're learning from this about the economy and politics.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Ezra Klein's new book, Why We're Polarized. This is from the introduction, and it's a couple pages into it. I'm starting out here. I have found that American politics is best understood by braiding two forms of knowledge that are often left separate: the direct, on-the-ground insights shared by politicians, activists, government officials, and other subjects of my reporting, and the more systemic analyses conducted by political scientists, sociologists, historians, and others with the time, methods, and expertise to study American politics at scale. On their own, political actors often ignore the incentives shaping their decisions, and academic researchers miss the human motivations that drive political decision-making. Together, however, they shine bright light on how and why American politics works the way it does. There's much awry in American politics, and I won't in this book attempt to catalog all of it. But I've come to believe the master story, the one that drives almost all divides and most fundamentally shapes the behavior of participants, is the logic of polarization. That logic, put simply, is this: to appeal to a more polarized public, political institutions and political actors behave in more polarized ways. As political institutions and actors become more polarized, they further polarize the public. This sets off a feedback cycle. To appeal to a yet more polarized public, institutions must polarize further. When faced with yet more polarized institutions, the public polarizes further, and so on. Understanding that we exist in relationship with our political institutions, that they are changed by us and we are changed by them, is the key to this story. We don't just use politics for our own ends. Politics uses us for its own ends. There are many different types of polarization possible, and I'll discuss some of them later in the book, but the locus of polarization I'll discuss is on political identity. And that requires saying a few words about a term that should be very useful in American politics, but that has become almost useless: identity politics. A core argument of this book is that everyone engaged in American politics is engaged in identity politics. This is not an insult, and it's not controversial. We form and fold identities constantly, naturally. Identity is present in politics in the way gravity, evolution, or cognition is present in politics. That is to say, it is omnipresent in politics because it is omnipresent in us. There is no way to read the literature on how humans form and protect their personal and group identities, literature I will survey in this book, and believe that any of us is immune. It runs so deep in our psyches, so activated so easily by even weak cues and distant threats, that it is impossible to speak seriously about how we engage with one another without discussing how our identities shape that engagement. Unfortunately, the term identity politics has been weaponized. It is most often used by speakers to describe politics as practiced by members of historically marginalized groups. If you're black and you're worried about police brutality, that's identity politics. If you're a woman and you're worried about the male-female pay gap, that's identity politics. But if you're a rural gun owner decrying universal background checks as tyranny, or a billionaire CEO complaining that high tax rates demonize success, or a Christian insisting on nativity scenes in public squares, well, that's just good old-fashioned politics. With a quick sleight of hand, identity becomes something that only marginalized groups have. The term identity politics in this usage obscures rather than illuminates. It's used to diminish and discredit the concerns of weaker groups by making them look self-interested, special pleading in order to clear the agenda for the concerns of stronger groups, which are framed as more rational, proper topics for normal political debate. But in wielding identity as a blade, we have lost it as a lens, blinding ourselves in a bid for political advantage. We're left searching in vain for what we refuse to allow ourselves to see. All politics is influenced by identity. Those identities are most powerful when they are so pervasive as to be either invisible or uncontroversial. American is an identity. So too is Christian. When politicians, including the irreligious, end speeches with "God bless America," it's not because they're making an appeal to a higher power, but because they're making an appeal to our bedrock identities. If you don't believe me, ask yourself why there are so few open atheists or even agnostics in national politics. This does not mean that politics is an equation solved by locating identity. Identity shapes our worldview, but it does not mechanistically decide it. And while we often speak of identity as a singular, it is always a dizzying plural. We have countless identities, some of them in active conflict with each other, others lying dormant until activated by threat or fortune. Much that happens in political campaigns is best understood as a struggle over which identities voters will inhabit come election day. Will they feel like workers exploited by their bosses, or heartlanders dismissed by coastal elites? Will they vote as patriotic traditionalists offended by NFL players who kneel during the national anthem, or as parents worried about the climate their children will inhabit? What we are often fighting over in American politics is group identity and status. Fights that express themselves in debates over policy and power, but cannot be truly reconciled by either. Health policy is positive sum, but identity conflict is zero sum. The book, Why We're Polarized, by Ezra Klein. We've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago. that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's States in a successful effort to loosen credit and thereby free up sources for finance. In Defense of Public Service by Cedric Alexander.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Kshama Sawant, the city council member in Seattle. She's the socialist who represents District 3. She's an economist, a member of the Socialist Alternative Party, seattle.gov/council/Sawant, S-A-W-A-N-T, is the website, and you can tweet her at CMK Kshama, S-H-A-M-A. Kshama, welcome to the program, or welcome back. What's going on in Seattle right now? You guys are the epicenter. I mean, when this bomb hit the United States, it looks like it hit your area first.
Yeah, the Seattle area, not just the Seattle city, became the first epicenter of the coronavirus crisis. But as we know now, it's nationwide, and this is a global pandemic. And I think one of the first things that has emerged is the absolute crisis that our healthcare system is in, because we don't have public healthcare, because we don't have Medicare for all, single-payer healthcare. We are seeing the complete breakdown of the system. We are one thing is, and as you said, I'm an economist. I'm not a medical professional, but the thousands of articles and reporting that we have seen from around the world with physicians with a lot of information and experience in epidemiology telling us that we need to carry out mass testing now, and that's not happening. And this is in the richest country in the world. And then on top of that, we're saying because we need to have a policy, nationwide policy of social distancing, so many working people have been told, go home, you don't come to work, but there's no guaranteed paid leave. And so many workers, especially in the service industry, restaurant industry, have been laid off. And so right now, one of the most important things that my office and our movement here is fighting for is to immediately tax Amazon and other big businesses so that we can make at least $500 million, if not more, available to provide cash assistance to the workers who are losing income right now. That is great. And that, a city would start looking at this and saying, okay, the federal government isn't doing anything close to what needs to be done, and by and large has been completely ignoring this up until the last week, or even laughing at it, Trump making jokes or saying, oh, like a miracle, it's all going to go away. The city of Seattle feels like you have to step up. San Francisco has gone to sheltering in place. New York City is considering it and probably will in the next 24 hours. Where's Seattle at right now? I don't think that such a policy has been put in place, but I won't be surprised if it's just a matter of time. In fact, maybe just a matter of days. Statistically speaking, I don't know how Seattle cannot also have that policy, given that San Francisco, as you said, has already gone. And so, it's like 6.5 to 8 million people now in that area, and, who have to abide by that policy. New York, as you said, is about to go. So I think that that's going to happen in Seattle as well. But I want to make sure that people who are watching this don't feel paralyzed, because, yes, we have to comply with social distancing policies because that's in the interest of our, collective, our society. It depends on that. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, that should not stop us from organizing. This is the exact right moment to get organized. As you said, the Trump administration has been completely incapable, incompetent of dealing with this crisis. And on top of that, you are seeing the sort of the normal consequences of having a system like capitalism. And yes, Seattle, we have seen the political establishment in Seattle actually do some things. But that has been not because they have shown leadership. It's because leadership has come from below. So just to give you a concrete example, we were able to win a moratorium on residential and small business evictions just days ago. And that was because we launched an online petition with 8,600 now. By now, probably 9,000, 10,000 people have signed. And then, we're showing the example of online organizing. And I know a lot of the workers at Amazon, at Whole Foods, a lot of workers are demanding better pay, paid sick leave. And so we need to make sure that we are in solidarity with one another's movements.
Yeah, it is just absolutely extraordinary. Shama, thank you so much for sharing with us what you all are doing there in Seattle and re-emphasizing the importance of programs like Medicare for All. I really think when we get on the other side of this, a year and a half, 2 years down the road, that we're going to see a revival in America like we saw after World War II, where we reconsidered our economy, or like we saw after the Great Depression, really, where we reconsidered our economy and moved forward. So thanks so much for dropping by and for being a voice of reason and for the great work you're doing in Seattle.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. It's great talking with you. I wanted to share some other information with you all. And Shama Sawant, of course, on the Seattle City Council, and one of the real heroes out there. Consumer Reports put out a piece on how to kill this virus. And soap and water, number one, soap and water. In fact, I saw it on CNN this morning. Poppy Harlow was showing this really cool little thing where how she was teaching her kids about soap and water. If you take a plate, like a white dinner plate, and fill it, pour water in it, so it's just, you've got this little pool of water that's 6-8 inches in diameter. Sprinkle a whole bunch of pepper onto it, so you've got pepper floating on the surface. Take your finger and put just a drop of soap on it. Pretty much any kind of soap, although probably detergent, dish soap works best. And then have your kids watch and touch the water surface with your finger. And all those particles of pepper will fly away from your finger and create this giant circle where there's nothing there. And that's what soap does, right? So number one, soap. Number two, bleach. This is, again, from Consumer Reports. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommends a diluted bleach solution. 1/3 cup, I'm reading from the Consumer Reports piece, 1/3 cup bleach per 1 gallon of water, or 4 teaspoons bleach per 1 quart of water for virus disinfection. Keep in mind, by the way, that this is the most caustic. This is the most extreme thing you can do. Wear gloves when you're using bleach. Never mix it with ammonia or anything, in fact, except water. So that's another one. Alcohol. Alcohol solutions have to be at least 70% alcohol to be effective against the coronavirus on hard surfaces. Hydrogen peroxide, 3% hydrogen peroxide, which is what you buy in the grocery store, is actually effective at deactivating rhinoviruses. Those are the viruses that cause the common cold, with 6 to 8 minutes of exposure. And hydrogen peroxide is not corrosive like bleach. It takes a little longer to work, though. Just keep that in mind. What not to use against the coronavirus? Handmade hand sanitizers. They have to be at least 70% alcohol. Vodka, no, vodka is only 40% alcohol, even though it's, maybe 80 proof, that's 40%. Proof is double, and you got to have 70% alcohol. Distilled white vinegar, there's all these things online about distilled white vinegar will kill the virus. No, it doesn't. So, pay attention to this. As I said, Consumer Reports has this report out, and you can check it out. After the break, I want to get into in some detail just what this virus has exposed about our country. But first, I wanted to share with you Elizabeth Warren's 8 demands for corporations receiving federal bailouts. Number one, they have to maintain their payrolls and use all the money to pay their employees. Number two, they must promise to have and actually have a $15 minimum wage within 12 months. Number three, a permanent ban on repurchasing their shares. Number four, no dividends or executive bonuses for 3 years. Number five, at least one board member has to be elected by the workers. Number six, collective bargaining agreements have to remain in place without changes. Number seven, shareholder and board approval must be sought for any political expenditures. And I would add probably lobbying to that. And number eight, CEOs must certify that the company is actually doing all these things. And if they fail to do these things, the CEOs face jail time. We bailed out the banks with literally trillions of dollars. The Fed actually created about $20 trillion in 2008 to bail out banks, billionaires, insurance companies, and other big institutions. We did an $800 billion stimulus package. We handed hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars to the banksters. And what did they give us? They put it all in their pocket and ran. The airlines have taken over $40 billion in share buybacks, but they want a $50 billion bailout now?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So it's time to say no. Get to the back of the damn line. We'll be back. Stick around. And welcome back. Abby in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Hey, Abby, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call, even though I want to talk about something else for just a little bit. There was a primary yesterday.
Yeah, I mentioned that.
But anyway, we've been seeing people like Jim Clyburn and James Carville on our TVs talking about how the primary needs to be shut down. And I find myself angrily waving my middle finger at the TV every time they say that. And here's
you
why.
Must be watching MSNBC. I'm not seeing that on CNN.
Well, I've been seeing the little clips played on shows like yours. What the deal is? Two things. First, we've got down ballot races and all these other primaries that are still to come. I'm in Wisconsin, and here in Wisconsin, we have a very important Supreme Court race. We got to get rid of one of Scott Walker's appointees, these conservatives, and we're counting on having a big showing of Democrats so that we can vote Jill Karofsky into office. So that's one thing.
Here's the problem, Bobby. People have to get, when's your primary in Wisconsin?
April 7th. But I understand all the coronavirus
and people have
fears,
time to get a mail ballot.
That aside for the sake of this
You've got to get a mail-in ballot. No, the bottom line is you've got to get a mail-in ballot.
Mail-in ballots. The other issue is that I was a Bernie delegate in 2016, and when I hear Carville say shut this thing down, what he's really saying is shut out all the Bernie delegates from all the states that haven't voted yet. Even if we're generous and say that Joe's got a 60 to 40 margin in these other states yet to come, I calculated that would basically be about 500 Bernie delegates that are going to turn into Biden delegates. So what Carville is saying, it's like we want to shut this thing down so that in Milwaukee this summer we have an arena full of nothing but Biden delegates. All those pesky Bernie delegates aren't there anymore, and that really angers me. So however we need to conduct the campaign, I think the campaign should still be conducted. We need to fight for every delegate because 46, 40, close to 50%. And not only that, but Bernie has won the battle of ideas. And who better to represent these ideas than Bernie delegates?
Yeah. I get everything you're saying, Avi, and I don't disagree with any of it, but we have to put it in the context of a world that has literally changed right in front of us. This world is not going to be the same for years. I mean, it's going to take years for there to be widespread immunization. We're in like the early stages of a smallpox epidemic kind of thing, It's like immunization is probably going to be the thing that stops this. And that's not going to be available for a year and a half, 2 years. So right now, what we need to do is we need to be encouraging anybody who lives in any state where you can get a mail-in ballot. If you can go online and do it, or call your department of whatever it is, Secretary of State's office, and get yourself signed up for absentee ballot or vote by mail ballot or whatever your state calls it, and vote. But that said,
in-person absentee voting is what they call it here.
Right. Yeah, okay, that's great. And that said, I mean, even if Bernie drops out right now, that doesn't mean that the primaries aren't going to continue. There's all kinds of primaries going on, and these states need to adapt themselves really rapidly to this. And this was why I had Ron Wyden on the program yesterday. He's proposed legislation to do just that. And Mark Pocan was on this morning talking about it very favorably. So we'll see. But your point is well taken. On the other hand, I don't think Bernie wants to be encouraging people to go out to the polls physically. And so maybe he'll take that middle ground that you and I are talking about, hey, I'm going to stay in, but I'm asking you not to vote unless you can vote by absentee ballot. Well, I don't know. We'll see what he says. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at ThomHartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So I wanted to very quickly just share with you some observations, some of the things that we've learned from this coronavirus epidemic, and not only what we've learned, but where we can go from this. Dan Coyes wrote a great piece over at Slate.com. It's titled "Policy Changes in Reaction to the Coronavirus Reveal How Absurd So Many of Our Rules Are to Begin With." I've seen it reposted around the internet titled "America is a Sham," because that's his refrain throughout this thing. He points out that the airlines are now saying, that 3-ounce rule, well, if it's hand sanitizer, you can bring up to 12 ounces, no big deal. I mean, no plane has ever fallen out of the sky because somebody brought a liquid on board. These binary. I was making jokes about this stuff on the air when the TSA first passed this rule. They said, you can sneak onto an airplane with 2 chemicals and mix them in the bathroom and turn it into a bomb. Right. It was BS. It was a scam. All over America, he points out. Don Coyes points out. All over America, much of contemporary American life is BS, with power structures built on punishment and fear as opposed to our best interests. He's talking about how the city of San Antonio is saying, well, why are we keeping our jails crowded with people who might be sick? So they're letting people out who can't pay bail. Why do we have cash bail to begin with? Period. The federal government is charging interest on loans to attend college. Well, and Trump has said, well, we're going to have the federal agencies who administer those loans waive the interest accrual for the duration of the crisis. Well, first of all, we haven't seen this put into policy yet. He's just talking. But why on earth is the government charging citizens interest in the first place? Why does the government have to make a profit on student loans? For that matter, why do we even have to have student loans? It's a scam. Broadband caps and throttled internet. He says these have been eliminated by AT&T and other ISPs because of the coronavirus. Well, why'd you have them there in the first place? It's a scam. It's a way of squeezing more money out of the customer and out of the consumers. Police in New Orleans, Miami, and New York City will no longer help evict people from their homes on behalf of banksters and landlords. Well, why were they helping in the first place? Police? Really? The city, you've got cities around the country. Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan, he says, no Detroit residents should have concerns about whether their water service will be interrupted. They're going to pause cutting people's water off when they don't pay their bills. Why did they cut their water off in the first place? Shouldn't water be a right? I mean, yeah, okay, so you don't pay it. So we go after you for that, figure out a way, garnish, whatever, but cut off your water? Really? Sick employees are forced to work or take unpaid leave or work while sick. I mean, most of the countries of Europe have, this was tweeted a couple of days ago by Bernie Sanders, most of the countries in Europe have up to 50 weeks of paid sick leave or maternity leave or family leave. And we're right now the Democrats in Congress are fighting to get us 2 weeks, and the Republicans are saying, no, that's too much. I mean, this is the scam that has become America. Now, on top of that, we're looking at the markets just going absolutely nuts. And I've had people ask me, why is it that mortgage rates are actually going up and government bonds don't seem to be the great investment they used to be? Why is it that the amount of the interest rates that bonds pay are going up at a time when they should be going down? And it varies from day to day. But why is this? Well, it's because people are hitting margin calls. You've got a whole bunch of big investment houses and hedge funds and billionaires who have all kinds of money in the stock market. The stock market is tanking. They're bailing out, but a lot of it is on margin. And so they're having to raise money to pay these margin calls. So how do they raise that money? They sell off their safe securities. They're selling their bonds. As they're selling their bonds, there's less demand for bonds. Less demand for bonds means the bonds have to pay a higher interest rate in order to get people to buy them, which means that bonds are acting in a way that they've never before acted. And it's not that people are afraid that the United States government is going to default, although what you're seeing across the country right now is that municipal bonds and state bonds are in trouble because people are concerned that cities are going to default and states are going to default. And then on top of that, we've got this new problem, shrinking access to credit. This was in the Financial Times, or no, in the New York Times, excuse me, by Tiffany Sue and Emily Flitter. Jeffrey Albrecht, who owns 3 Holiday Inn hotels in southern Ohio, watched as $200,000 disappeared from his books in just 3 days as people began canceling bookings. Guess what happened? His banker called. He's got a mortgage. He wanted to know how much money could Mr. Albrecht lose before he would miss a loan payment. Albrecht said, probably 4 months. I mean, this is like small businesses, companies that run on credit, it's going to get harder and harder to get credit because all this money is being sucked out of the system by banks that have been gambling in the stock markets, which is what bit them in the back end in 2008. They're still at it, right? We never put Glass-Steagall back into place. They are still doing this. And the reason why mortgage rates are going up is because again, for the same reason, because wealthy people, big investors, institutional investors, and banks are dumping their mortgage-backed securities. Well, if you can't sell the bonds, the aggregated bonds, these collateralized security instruments, if you can't sell those things, then you have to raise the interest that you pay. If you have to raise the interest that you pay, you have to raise the interest that you charge. And so what's happening is that mortgage rates are actually going up instead of down, even though Trump or Steve Mnuchin just took it was the Fed, it was Jerome Powell, just took our interest rates to 0. But mortgage rates are going up. Why? Again, these wealthy, the masters of the universe, as it were, are sucking their money out of the system because they're having to make margin calls or because they're just trying to get liquid as fast as they can. In the Financial Times, government bonds buckle as investors dump haven assets for cash. Over in the Financial Times, again, mortgage rates increase pressure for Fed intervention. So what people are suggesting to solve this problem is that the Fed become the lender of last resort, not just to the big banks, but to everyone. We'll see how that works out. I mean, there's a million details that need to be worked out, but at least there's a conversation about it, because if this thing freezes up, it's 2008 all over again. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And I realize, all that financial stuff, you probably feel like you were trying to drink out of a fire hose. It was a lot of data. I'm glad to answer questions on the phone, too. We'll be back.
This is the
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is No Visible Bruises, What We Don't Know About Domestic Violence Can Kill Us by Rachel Louise Snyder. I'm reading from the preface. This is page 4. Suzanne and I exchanged small talk on her brother's driveway that day in 2010. She and the family were still in preparation and packing mode for their annual camping vacation into the hinterlands of Maine, and Suzanne had been greeted by her brother Andre with a long shopping list. She had told me she worked for a domestic violence agency in town and that they had recently developed a new program that she was calling the Domestic Violence High Risk Team. Their primary aim was simple, she said. We try to predict domestic violence homicides before they happen so we can prevent them. It sounded immediately implausible. So implausible, in fact, that I thought I'd misheard some elemental piece of it. Predict, I remember saying? You said predict domestic violence homicides? I had come across domestic violence in my reporting over the years, not only in Cambodia, but also in places like Afghanistan, Niger, and Honduras. But it had never been a focus for me. Instead, it was always adjacent to whatever other story I was writing, so much so that it was practically banal. The young girls jailed for love crimes in Kabul, the Indian child brides who gave interviews only in front of the men who controlled them, the Tibetan women forcibly sterilized by the Chinese government, the teenage brides in Niger cast from their villages after post-pregnancy fistulas made them pariahs, the Romanian women forced to give to birth multiple children under Ceausescu and who now in their early 30s were grandmothers fated to poverty, the Cambodian street workers beaten and gang-raped for weekend sport by well-heeled Khmer teenagers. All of these women in every country were brutalized and controlled by men as a matter of routine. Men made the rules, primarily through physical violence. It was there, lurking in practically every story I'd ever covered around the world, a shadowy background so obvious I didn't even have to ask about it most of the time. It was as common as rain. Until that moment in the driveway with Suzanne Dubas, if I thought of domestic violence in the United States at all, I saw it as an unfortunate fate for the unlucky few, a matter of bad choices and cruel environments. A woman hardwired to be hurt, a man hardwired to hurt. But I never envisioned it as a social ill, an epidemic we can actually do something about. Now here was Susan Dubas talking about preventative measures for a type of violence that, for the first time, I saw operating along a continuum. The young girl in India married as a child, the Tibetan woman sterilized, the Afghan woman jailed, the housewife in Massachusetts brutalized by her husband. They all shared a common privation, what domestic violence victims across the world lacked: agency in their own lives. The forces that brought a Cambodian prostitute to the brink of death were the same forces that killed thousands of women and children and men, but mostly women and children, across America and the entire globe every year. An average, in fact, of 137 women each and every day are killed by intimate partner or familial violence across the globe, and this does not include men or children. Everything in my body suddenly came alive that day. I saw all the faces of women around the world from over 2 decades of work, and I realized how rarely I'd gazed inward at my own country, at what we got wrong and what it meant. The universality of domestic violence and how it crisscrosses geographical, cultural, and linguistic barriers. Maybe all those other stories were in preparation for the day that I'd meet Paul Monson and look at the mountains from his living room windows. I ended up following Suzanne to the farmer's market and then to the grocery store and then to the liquor store as she prepped for her camping trip. I helped her carry ice and peaches and hamburger meat. I asked question after question while she drove and while her mother Pat sat in the passenger seat, chiming in here and there. How did it work? How many have you stopped? What else can you predict? My questions were vast and endless. Like many people who hold a casual acquaintance with a problem, I believed all the common assumptions. That if things were bad enough, victims would just leave. That restraining orders solved the problem. And that if a victim didn't show up to renew a restraining order, the problem had been solved. That going to a shelter was an adequate response for victims and their children. That violence inside the home was something private, unrelated to other forms of violence, perhaps most notably mass shootings. That a lack of visible injury signaled a lack of seriousness. And perhaps most of all, that unless we stand at the receiving end of a punch, such violence had nothing to do with us at all. Over the next few years, Suzanne Dubas and her colleague Kelly Dunn patiently taught me about the scope and history of an issue that still today is too often hidden. I learned why past approaches had failed and what we could do more effectively today. Between 2000 and 2006, 3,200 American soldiers were killed. During that same period, domestic homicide in the United States claimed 10,600 lives. This figure is likely an underestimate, as it was pulled from the FBI's supplementary homicide reports, which gather data from local police departments, and participation is voluntary. 20 people in the United States are assaulted every minute by their partners. Former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan called violence against women and girls the most shameful human rights violation. And the World Health Organization called it a global health problem of epidemic proportions. A study put out by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime cited 50,000 women around the world were killed by partners or family members in 2017 alone. 50,000 women. The UNODC report called home the most dangerous place for women. The book No Visible Bruises by Rachel Louise Snyder. Coming up on the Science Revolution, what's the truth on coronavirus testing? And why has Trump refused to accept the World Health Organization test that the entire rest of the planet is using? Melinda St. Louis is here on how the insurer's conduct is outrageous on the coronavirus pandemic. Robert Weissman joins in on how Public Citizen and 70 organizations are calling on Trump to prevent Big Pharma from profiteering on coronavirus. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear is also here about the ongoing Fukushima disaster. And in Geeky Science, find out what happens if you walk just 30 minutes a day. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever you find great podcasts. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The battery in my IFB transmitter was just croaking. Anyhow, there's a couple things I want to share with you real quickly. And the reason that I'm sharing this particular one with you is that I have gotten 4 of these calls now in the last 2 days. The robo scam artists are running full tilt boogie right now. And I'm going to play this voicemail that I've gotten this voicemail 4 different times from 4 different phone numbers, all in the Oregon area code. They can spoof your area code, so you think it's a local call, you think it's somebody you know. And this is what they're saying is basically, you've been overcharged, and just call this number or contact us, and we'll fix it for you. Here it is.
You got overcharged by your third-party supplier. You will be receiving a rebate check along with a 30% discount on your electric and gas bill.
Right.
Please press 1 to get your rebate check.
Right. See, and at that point, you press 1 and boom, you're talking to somebody who's saying, oh, yeah, well, you know, and they're going to take your money. So if you get one of those things, do not do it, right? Because they're really aggressively doing this thing. I just got that call like 20 minutes ago. Finally, Trump says, let them eat coronavirus. This is just crazy. It is, yeah, here it is. Mark Sumner writing about this over at the Daily Kos. Somebody asked, in his press conference, somebody asked Donald Trump, are the wealthy and powerful, the rich and powerful being Lindsey Grahams of the world, wealthy being whoever they are they getting coronavirus tests before anybody else, and is that fair? And Trump basically said, that's life. That's the way things are. It's amazing. Anyhow, let's pick up your phone calls here. John in Los Angeles. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, I've got this COVID-19 solved, but I need you and your brilliant listeners to tell me what I'm mistaken and what I'm getting wrong. Why do they not, instead of having mass hysteria that's causing all these other ripple effect problems, why don't they simply selectively target those populations that are seriously at risk? This is like a cold to 90-something% of the population. It's like a mild cold you get over.
No, it is absolutely not, John. John, I'm not going to let you spread that kind of BS and disinformation and lies on my air. This is not like a cold for 90%. It's a very severe disease for at least half the people who get it. And about 20% of the people who get it require hospitalization. And this whole sales pitch that's out there in right-wing hate radio and was on Fox News up until yesterday when suddenly Fox News changed their tune because all these multimillionaire hosts realized, hey, I could get this. It's just this. These are lies, John, that you're believing or that you're intentionally spreading. And they will kill people. And I'm not going to allow you to do things on my air that might kill people. Everybody is at risk with this disease. Kids can get sick from this, really sick, like lifelong lung damage sick. 20-somethings die from it. It's a great piece in the New York Times a couple of days ago about 2 29-year-old nurses who both got the virus. One of them died. 30-year-olds die from it. People in their 30s die from this. People in their 40s die more frequently from it. People in their 50s even more frequently. And kids, in many cases, they don't show symptoms. About half of them don't show any symptoms, but they're spreading it all over the place. And they're spreading it to people who are older and who will die. So, John, that kind of mentality and that sales pitch that you're selling, I'm not buying it. Go sell it to Rush Limbaugh. Florence in Tenino, Washington. Am I saying that right, Florence?
Yes, that's great. Thanks, Tom. So understandably, with the coronavirus, this fell through the cracks. But Washington State has about 70,000 uncounted primary ballots, mostly because people didn't mark the party preference box that they're a Democrat or a Republican, because there are so many independents here. So voters have until tomorrow, Thursday, at 4:30 to cure that. So Google or DuckDuckGo your county auditor's office, and then call them, and they will help you cure your ballot. We're already changing the close race that's doing that, and I believe the more delegates that Bernie has, the greater the chance the Democrats will listen to us on our needs.
Great. Thank you, Florence. Thank you for that. Carol in Hemet, California. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, just 15 seconds. My brother is a bus driver in New York City. he called us and told us that they have no face masks, no gloves, no protective gear, social distancing in New York on a bus. Try it. Yeah. And but what I wanted to say was my brother has incurable, inoperable liver cancer, and there's no more chemotherapy that he can take. And under these circumstances, he's out there driving with his immune system in that condition. And also, were they to declare a shelter in place, transportation is considered essential service. My brother cannot stop working. He is chock full of bills from his cancer. Yeah. He's also a dad. Yeah. And he probably has 2 years to live.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Oh, no,
to hear that,
and,
Carol.
I'm just saying, and here we are with this precedent, this financial system, this economic system, and we don't think he has 2 years. And how much of that is going on in this country with the cancer rates that we have? Anyway, I'll hang up. Thank you.
Yeah, well said, Carol. Thank you very much. Vincent in Akron, Ohio. Hey, Vincent, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom. I wanted to call in about mainly the money aspect of the coronavirus, and perhaps a different way than you might expect. My family has, honestly, a lot of money. My parents started a business 20-some years ago, sold it, made a boatload, but we're all progressive. And we're watching the TV, yelling at it, going, healthcare, not wealthcare, guys. Come on. We're going to be fine. In fact, I might even make, perversely, some money off the crisis because the market's going down, so I'll be, buying stuff up as it tanks. But most people couldn't do that.
So what's your point, Vincent?
Well, some of us actually care. And also, Mike DeWine, I think his closing the polls and whatnot was actually quite a good thing. And even though some people are, just a lot safer.
Although I think that Ohio, actually, I think what he should have done was he should have said and I'm guessing he didn't because he doesn't have the legal authority to do it. It probably would blow up against the Constitution of Ohio. But I thought he should have said, we've had absentee balloting, for the last couple of months, whatever it is in Ohio, and we are going to we're going to declare the election over before the polls open, and the ballots that we're going to be counting are the absentee ballots, and it's just going to be that way. Vincent, thanks for the call. And Richard in Rio, Wisconsin. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
I'm just wondering, with the airlines and them wanting all this money, the government money,
right.
Why are people not waking up and seeing that Bernie would be the best president? Because I'm afraid Biden will just give them what they want.
Well, I think that, in the last 24 hours or maybe 48, last couple of days, Joe Biden has come out and said that he's adopted, one of Elizabeth Warren's policies, free education for everyone. He just picked up another policy, another one of Bernie's policies. I'm sorry, I had a list here. I'll come up with it tomorrow. But he is moving to the left just as fast as he possibly can. And I think he's going to have to. Because frankly, Donald Trump is going to run, assuming Biden's the nominee, Donald Trump is going to run to his left. Trump is going to say, I'm the guy who's going to save your Social Security. And Joe Biden said he was opposed to, he was willing to cut it. He's going to say, I'm the guy who's going to save your Medicare. And Biden was willing to cut it. And so Biden has to position himself to the left of Donald Trump, which is going to be a challenge. So we'll see. We'll see how it plays out. Richard, thanks for the call. Kyle in Earlville, Illinois. Hey, Kyle, what's up?
Hey, just calling. You introduced me sometimes as your conservative troll, but I will say I have thought your response to this is better to listen to than a lot on the right. So I actually do appreciate your
thank you, Kyle.
Approach. But on the topic of evictions, and you made a comment that even without this, that cops shouldn't be assisting in evictions, and I agree now, pause everything. I mean, it's not the time to do it, but I don't think we can change politics when we come out the other side of this, and that, I have a few rentals. There's no practical way, if somebody's gone through the court process, then they're told to leave, and they don't. So the reason the cops are involved is at some point in time, they have reached the end of the road, and it needs to be done safely. We can't create a situation where they stay indefinitely, and we can't change it after this is resolved. Is all
you don't have the ability, Kyle, to garnish their checking accounts and their income?
It gets to a point where you're out of options. They didn't ever meet any compliance, and it's over.
Well, we should have, as a country, we should have a conversation about this, Kyle. We should, because you should be made whole. And I don't think cops should be doing evictions.
To
Thanks for
Thom
the call.
Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Maybe there's some sort of middle ground, like, we're not here to evict you, we're here to take you to housing. What if we provided housing to everybody? And welcome back. Dawn in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Dawn, how are you? What's up?
Hey, Tom. I am calling because I believe that with this national pandemic and the crisis response that's required, we ought to be crowdsourcing the solution in the form of looking back through the list of every single entity that has benefited from Trump's tax cuts over the last 3 years and extending far backward into Obama's administration. Each entity that has benefited by our tax dollars, they need to look back into their coffers for ways that they can give our taxes back. So,
yeah,
Wells
for example,
Fargo,
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
Wells
Dawn.
Fargo, Bank of America, all these lenders, mortgage holders, people that have and entities that have taken massive subsidies in the form of tax dollars over the last decade need to be paying the bills of the people who cannot pay their bills right now because they are not earning an income. And if we call on the federal government to demand that every recipient of that benefit find a way to re-enter that financing, all that money that they have taken from our tax dollars back into the communities in the form of paying our bills. Georgia Power should not be asking me to pay my bills right now because I am a small business owner and I am responsible for the incomes of a couple of other people in my local community. And I have 3 children who are dependents who are now being failed by every public structural system that is supposed to be there to support our ability to earn an income. Those have all failed me. So for that reason, every tax dollar that I've paid into those entities, that needs to come back towards me and every other person like me who is unable to earn an income and looking at a pile of bills we will not be able to pay and having to choose right now between drama with the mortgage company and losing our homes or feeding our children and buying the necessary medications if needed. It's very simple math, but it has to be from the top down. The government has to demand it, and then those entities can come forth and say, this is how we're going to support you in this time. Walmart should have a free drive up, get a care package with sanitizer, toilet paper, and a couple of basic medicines for anyone in the community who needs it. They've taken so much from us.
I get
there
it.
There are easy ways to solve this, crowdsourcing.
Yes, I think you're right. Dawn, thank you. That was a great rant. And let me add, just look at the 5 big airlines. They have, before Reagan, it was illegal for a company to buy back its own stock and for a company to compensate its officers with stock. Reagan changed that, and this is why the stock market has gone like this, because they're gaming the system. The 5 big airlines have bought back $42 billion worth of their own stock in the last 10 years. And now they're coming to us and they're saying, give us a $50 billion bailout. And I'm saying, why don't you just sell $50 billion worth of your stock that you're sitting on? Oh, you gave it to your executives? Well, let them sell it. I mean, it's obviously it didn't all go to their executives. It's out there in the marketplace and all that kind of stuff. But I think we should be in a break, Sean. But it's just general craziness. Oh, I see, 2 seconds. Yeah, see, I got to learn this clock. 2025. I thought it was 00. Anyhow, we'll be. Okay, we'll be right back. Stick with me. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. The audio, is that better? I can't do anything about it. Welcome back, Thom Hartmann here with you. I understand my audio is a little distorted. I'm not sure exactly why, and we'll troubleshoot this after I get off the air. Dennis in Shorewood, Illinois. Hey, Dennis, what's up?
Oh, hi. Yeah, Tom, I'm an old retired science teacher. I'm 73, and one of your previous callers said he had a couple of relatives that were physicians, and that the 6 feet isn't adequate to stay away from other people. And so in the back of my mind, I had about 15 feet on a sneeze. So I thought, well, I'll check it out. I'll Google it. Okay, there were some research scientists from MIT that were studying coughs and sneezes. And they measured coughs as far as 6 meters, which is about 17 and a half feet, and sneezes as far as 8 meters, which is approximately 27 feet. And the microscopic droplets can float and linger in the air for up to 10 minutes. So I thought maybe I'd try to pass that on. So the 6 feet doesn't do it.
Right, and so another reason why, if you're going to cough or sneeze, do it into your elbow.
Yeah. But
Excellent.
the other thing,
Dennis,
too, with it lingering, if somebody doesn't do that and it's lingering for up to 10 minutes in the air, you could walk to an area and not even know that somebody had sneezed there.
Yep.
So anyhow, I just thought I'd pass that on.
Yeah, let us not panic, but let us be very, very careful. Terry in Las Vegas. Hey, Terry, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to kind of rebut a little bit of something that Damon was saying earlier about people not wanting to help each other. I was at a grocery store yesterday here in Las Vegas, and I saw 2 instances of people being really, really kind. There was an older gentleman in one of the scooter carts. He had 2 packages of toilet paper in his cart, and he turned to the lady next to him and said, "Please put one of these back because I have more than I need and I don't want to be a hypocrite." The second one was, right? The second one was there was a gentleman in line, 2 people in front of me. He had an overflowing basket. The lady directly in front of me had just a few things in her basket. And as he was getting ready to put his things onto the conveyor belt, he turned to her and handed her a carton of eggs and said, "Here, please take these." And she's, "Are you sure?" And he said, "Yes, I have more than enough." And I just wanted to kind of end your show with something positive for a change.
Yeah. Tough times bring out the best in people. I mean, they bring out the worst, too. I mean, we're seeing this, with Trump, but they have the ability to bring out the best, and that's wonderful. Terry, thank you for sharing that with me. Mike in Seattle. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I don't understand why the stock markets are still open. Right after Trump's speech, there was a 15-minute stop. But why are they open 100% of the time that they're normally open when we are practically at war? Even the president is now saying that we are at war. What's happened in the past about this?
Well, the stock market didn't close during World War II. The stock markets, they closed right after 9/11 for a day or two, as I recall. And I think
did they have stock markets during the flu epidemic of 1918?
I was just going to say, I think right around World War I, there was a period around World War I where they closed just for a few days. But I saw an article about this a couple days ago in the Financial Times, and I'm sorry I don't recall all the details. But basically, throughout the history of the United States, and we've had stock markets literally since the Revolutionary War, and the stock markets have basically just never closed. I mean, they didn't close during the Civil War. Trading was very different, of course, but the stock markets didn't close. And they're talking right now about limiting the trading hours. But the fact of the matter is most stock markets are now, it's no longer guys on the trading floor shouting, "I want to buy some," it's all done electronically. And so the traders and the companies through which you execute your trades, if you have a Schwab account or a Fidelity account or whatever it may be, those companies, it's all electronic, and a lot of their employees are working from home. I got an email yesterday from the company that I have my retirement funds with, And they said, our employees are working from home, and here's how we're handling things like customer service. And if you call, it'll be rerouted to somebody's home. And don't be freaked out that it's not quite as normal. But I don't think that it's going to be a problem, Mike. Mike, thanks for the call. MJ in Puget Sound, Washington. Hey, MJ, what's up?
Hi. This past week, the people at the original nursing home that became ill was able to be tested.
In Lakewood?
And yes, and up in Kirkland. And
yeah, that's right.
And one of the problems that often people who have will have a job in more than one nursing home, and they're discovering that other nursing homes have become affected. The patients are becoming ill. There's reports up in British Columbia about nursing homes where they're having a nexus of cases. And one thing I want to tell you about passing this on is that, and this is about bathroom habits, I'll be as tasteful as I possibly can, but when your body is trying to clear itself of a virus, there are times in your body where it's sloughing off, and that's where it's going. It's going out your elimination. And so you must close the lid of your toilet and wash your hands carefully. This atomizing, the virus going into sprinkles in the air, that happens out of your toilet. Then it's been tested that it can go 6 feet.
Yeah, when you flush the toilet. I've seen that. I've seen those.
Yeah, and if you go into a public restroom, all of this is up in the air and there's no lid, etc. Just do your business as quickly, push and run.
Yeah.
Wash it.
Right, and avoid and thank you for the call, MJ, and avoid the hand dryers because they just blow viruses all over the place. Whew. What a day. We're learning, we're learning step by step. It's a different world than it was just 3 months ago. And it's going to be a different world for a while. So, we have to learn this. We have to, hug somebody today who, if you physically can, and if you can't, do it virtually. Call them up, connect with people. Check out meditation. Take a walk. Stay away from people, but take a walk. We'll get through this, and we'll make a better world because of it. Thanks so much for being with us. Get out there, get active, tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
Hello, I'm Casey Hobbs.
And I'm Shane Mason, and we're the hosts of Nurse Talk Radio.
Here's what we're talking about this week.
Salt in My Soul, An Unfinished Life by Mallory Smith is